Introduction. We live in an age of unprecedented information, where the ability to communicate effectively has never been more crucial. Yet, the words we speak often account for only a fraction of the message we convey. The unspoken language of the body, the subtle nuances of tone, and the hidden depths of the mind hold the key to truly understanding and influencing others. This book is your passport into the fascinating world of manipulation and NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and body language. While the word manipulation may evoke negative connotations, it's essential to understand that influence is a fundamental aspect of human interaction. Whether you're aiming to improve your personal relationships, advance your career, or simply enhance your communication skills, mastering these tools can be transformative. Within these pages, you will embark on a journey of self-discovery and skill development. We will explore the foundations of communication, delving into the intricacies of verbal and nonverbal cues. You will learn to read people like an open book, decoding the subtle signals that reveal their true thoughts and emotions. Body language, often overlooked, will be dissected, revealing its profound impact on how we perceive and are perceived. NLP, a powerful tool for understanding and influencing the mind, will be introduced, providing you with a framework for effective communication and persuasion. You will discover how to construct compelling messages, build rapport, and create lasting impressions. The art of persuasion, seduction, and sales will be demystified, equipping you with the strategies to achieve your goals ethically and responsibly. Ultimately, this book is about empowering you. It's about giving you the knowledge and confidence to navigate the complexities of human interaction. By understanding the underlying principles of manipulation, NLP, and body language, you will gain a competitive edge in both your personal and professional life. Remember, knowledge is power, and the ability to influence is a skill that can be mastered. Let's begin this exciting journey together. Chapter 1. Foundations of Communication. If you ever get close to a human and human behavior, be ready to get confused. There's definitely no logic to human behavior, but yet so irresistible. Björk musician, these lyrics come to mind as I consider the most appropriate way to introduce you to the world of neuro-linguistic programming and the power of persuasion to achieve your goals. Human behavior is a large part of it, almost all of it. So it's a great place to begin. We cannot avoid getting close to humans or intertwining with human behavior. It is a necessity of the world and of the human. It's easy to relate to these lyrics. Human behavior can be confusing, and it may seem there is no logic. And yet, the connection is so irresistible. The truth, though, is that human behavior seems like a wild and unpredictable river, but it really is comprised of logic and reason when we start to break it down. By acquainting yourself more closely with our basic human instincts and tendencies, you'll be able to pick up twice as much information in an interaction as you used to. This alone will make you a much better persuasive communicator, but we can go further than that. By the end of this section, you should have enough information to start reading each interaction you find yourself in, cognizant of what you are broadcasting and of what others are broadcasting. You don't have to necessarily do anything with this information just yet. Train yourself to look and listen for it and recognize it is sufficient for now. Understanding human behavior. It's important to acknowledge the primary drives for our inherent human behavior. The human may be a complex creature, but we are driven largely by a surprisingly few basic instincts. We're all equipped with basic human behaviors that help us to process and manage the environment around us. They help us to survive and adapt. When we react to stimuli, internally or externally, it's usually with a demonstration of one of the following instinctual behaviors. We feel a commitment to our tribe, partly because we want our tribe to be loyal to us, but also because it's in our best interests to stay on good terms with the tribe. Staying on good terms with the tribe is a relatively easy way to ensure shelter, food, safety, and a sense of belonging. Depending on the stimulus, we react by either displaying loyalty or asking for it. In either case, loyalty is an instinctual behavior mostly used for selfish reasons of self-preservation, rather than altruism as it might initially seem. Regardless, the idea of loyalty has built just as strong an entertainment following as revenge. We see allegiance and loyalty expressed in various ways all around us. Families demand loyalty, as do sports teams. To go against the group and turn your back on family, or a football team, would not be a socially acceptable move. Not only would the group have issues letting you back into their arms, but other groups will catch wind of your disloyalty and question whether you should be included. Loyalty to the company we work for is expected. Loyalty to brands. Loyalty cards. It's undeniably popular theme. We want loyalty from others, and we want to be perceived as loyal in order to maintain a respectable position within the social group. A very common coping mechanism is denial. When we're confronted with a situation that doesn't feel good or is overwhelming, one of the first things we do is deny it. It can't be real. We pretend it's not happening or that it doesn't exist, even though the problem or situation is very real. This can range from the relatively inconsequential to the severe. For example, you may be faced with a task you don't like doing, or that you don't feel confident doing. Instead of dealing with the task, you may consciously or subconsciously procrastinate on the task or forget to do it altogether. In a more drastic example, an individual could be faced with the stark truth that a loved one has passed. Rather than accept that truth, the individual might deny it. The individual may continue to talk about the loved one and act as if they haven't passed, as if they're still here. Denial may not be the healthiest coping skill, but it is one most of us share and commonly use, whether we mean to or not. One of the most interesting behavioral instincts we exhibit is that of revenge. For ages, humans have reacted with the desire for personal justice when we are confronted with a stimulus that we perceive as trespass against us. We don't just want to be righted. We want to punish the wrongdoer. We don't want a random person to suffer the punishment, though that does sometimes come up in psychology. We want the one who wronged us to suffer the consequence. When we seek revenge, it's a little bit like an addict seeking a fix. That's not just a careless comparison. It really is likened in our brains to the equivalent of a shot of dopamine or serotonin. Just the idea of getting revenge excites the part of our brain responsible for processing reward. Getting a taste of revenge is, at least at first, like a chemical boost of dopamine or serotonin. Revenge is used so often as a plot for movies and stories and media because it's so strong and so relatable to us. Almost anyone you know has wanted revenge at one time or another. We think revenge will make us feel better, but that can sometimes backfire. When we get revenge, sometimes it turns out that the feeling of satisfaction is short-lived and the revenge is not as expected. In many cases, a feeling of sinking to the same level as the wrongdoer makes us feel worse. Worse yet, the constant thinking about deserving revenge and getting revenge, and the thoughts about having taken revenge, all make for a fresh and open wound that will not be allowed to close and heal. We're under the impression that revenge will be a sense of closure for us, but we often find the opposite is true in the end. Revenge is so ingrained in our behavior that it's built into our social systems in various ways. Courts conduct a trial to determine someone's guilt and what the punishment should be. The court tries to offer justice to the wronged while punishing those who've done wrong, but not without guarding the rights of both. It's unfortunately all too often the case that the wronged do not benefit from a sense of justice, not in a way that repairs the damage. Another very strong and relatable drama is the idea of the vigilante, the justice seeker who takes the law into their own hands. This is very much a fantasy within us, especially in the cases where seeking justice by the rules has let us down. The vigilante is an alluring sign of revenge, and we see it so often in movies, because we secretly want to live out our own fantastic act of vigilantism in some ways. One of the most popular movies of the 60s, and recently remade again, True Grit, is a story of revenge, amongst other things. The main character, Maddie, is driven by revenge to seek the punishment of her father's killer. It's a remarkable example of the need for justice, as Maddie is but a young girl in the Old West, and her tenacity for revenge is so large. In the end, she even resorts to vigilante-esque behavior and tries to catch the killer herself. It's a perfect example of this inherent human behavior. In a real-life example, imagine a time you've been driving along at the speed limit and someone races up on you and passes by you in a flash going dangerously fast. You might think how great it would be to see that person pulled over by the cops up ahead. Just wanting to see that is a little taste of revenge. If you have a micro-fantasy about seeing them pulled over, another little taste. If you actually see them pulled over ahead and you feel a brief but overwhelming sense of joy and justice, you're getting your revenge fix. If revenge is so deeply a part of us, forgiveness must be, too. The power of forgiveness is an important part of revenge to also be aware of in your social interactions. Sometimes the power derived from acting in forgiveness and empathy is greater than anything we could hope for with revenge. When you start to feel the urge for revenge, consider all the energy you're wasting on the wrongdoer, that you could instead be concentrating on the goals you want to achieve. Giving the wrongdoer even one more thought is too much energy to give when it could be put toward your own happiness instead. Greed is an instinct that's a bit harder to define and measure. We tend to display greed in circumstances where we are convinced we will not have enough. This could be money, food, anything really. In reaction to a stimulus, we may end up hoarding these things in an attempt to protect ourselves. Another reason we tend to display greed when confronted with a stimulus is due to a psychological function referred to as a superiority complex. This is when you want something someone else has, and you don't want them to have it, so that you can appear to be the superior individual with the covetous property. It's harder to define and measure this instinct because greed is a bit more of a subjective experience. The areas turn gray when discussing someone's true motivation and intention for greedy behavior, regardless of why we do it. There's no denying it's a widely shared human instinct that we follow, respond to, and relate to. The last of the major instincts that drive us is the inevitable and deeply seated need to produce offspring. It's no surprise that perhaps the strongest instinct we are driven by is the instinct that has continued to keep our species alive. Without this powerful drive, we may not be here now. It's easy to understand then why this instinct rooted solely in producing a bloodline to surpass us is the one that controls a large part of how we react to those stimuli. Attraction, this is the tool of an influencer looking for love, or at least physical copulation. Our drive for sex is so powerful that we've come to a point in evolution where the desire for the sexual interaction surpasses the root need to create offspring. It's very important in most societies to present yourself as a candidate for sex. This is expressed in a number of ways and varies depending on the culture, but it's very common in each distinct culture to follow the social norms of someone who is either eligible for mating or already paired with another. This can, in some cultures, come as a particular hairstyle, headdress, or clothing to wear. In some cases, the jewelry or the markings on one's body will inform others in the tribe of the individual's status as a sexual partner. In addition to our basic instincts, there are other factors that play a part in how we react to stimuli. These are just as important, if not more common, and should be learned and utilized in the same way. These factors tend to complicate a situation, and you might confront more than one of them in a given scenario. This requires you, the influencer, to possess an understanding of what significance these factors have on an individual and how to leverage this knowledge. The characteristics we inherit from our parents can certainly play a role in how we process, manage, and react to stimuli and confrontation. Though we do not all share the same genetics, we do share the same experience that genetics plays a part in our human behavior. Hereditary characteristics may be visible or not. This could be exhibited as a visual trait, like from freckles, dimples, and hair color. It might also manifest as a subconscious behavior like wringing of the hands, or teeth grinding, or even something unseen, like type 1 diabetes. Though these traits may not have as strong a drive for us, they sometimes can. For example, if an individual has been exposed to the repeated experience of being criticized for an inherited trait, red hair and freckles, for example, that individual may try to augment their appearance, or try to compensate in other ways for what they see in themselves as a weakness. This individual may react in a certain way to a stimulus in the current moment, which reminds him or her about that negative experience. As we've evolved into a species that prefers to live and work in communities and groups, we've developed sets of social norms. These are the basic rules of the society that tell us how to think and behave to fit in with the group. There are 4 main types of social norms that can be found in a typical group or community. Traditions are the customs passed down from generation to generation, generally about what is right and wrong. Mores are the moral and ethical standards that the group or community observe and use for a compass. Taboos are the behaviors that the group or community deem unacceptable. Those who conduct themselves in an unacceptable way are often shamed or removed from the group. Laws are the official rules set by a group or community. Members of the tribe are expected to obey these rules or suffer the consequences. These rules are usually enforced by the tribe's government. Another factor that drives us is the opportunity for creativity. We want to be free to express ourselves and be of value to those around us by using our creative skills. When we are given tasks or jobs that allow us to solve problems creatively and encourage us to think creatively, we perform better nearly every time. We don't get burnt out as easily or quickly, and we take pride in our work. People are driven by creativity, and this is the main reason that creative programs inside of businesses like Google are so successful. Employees are given the distinct and regular opportunity to express themselves creatively to solve a problem or develop something, or construct or design something with regularity each month. It's usually something like 10 of your work time each month can be dedicated to following your creative streak on anything you want. At the end of the month, you're able to present what you've done. The productivity of the other 90s of the month goes through the roof. Everyone feels valued, and they feel the satisfaction of using their own creativity to accomplish tasks. All of these instincts and factors play a role in the ways we react. Now that you know what it is that causes us to react so strongly, you can use this information to read interactions, elicit positive responses, or mitigate negative reactions. In the following sections, we'll start to see how these reactions come out in our communication. We'll analyze the unspoken communication of body language like gestures and expressions that will deliver insight about a person's feelings. We'll also spend a good deal of time working with the spoken elements of communication as well. Before we do, it's important for you to understand where NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, comes from and how it uses both body language and spoken communication as its backbone. Understanding NLP, though NLP itself is rather new, only becoming popular in the late 70s and early 80s. There are key concepts that go back far and deep and play a major role in the development of strategic persuasion. If you're not familiar, or even if you are, it's smart to take a few minutes and review the history of psychology that leads up to NLP. Key ideas and names will help you to easily understand, build upon, and assimilate as you get closer to the core of NLP. Depending on how far back into the history of psychology you want to go, you'll find evidence of the philosophy and study of the effect of language on thought, and how this impacts our human interactions. This can be found as far back as thousands of years in the rhetorical debates of Greek and Roman philosophers. For an abbreviated but relevant version, let's step back not quite so far to the beginning of the 20th century. Here, we make the acquaintance, or reacquaintance, of Viennese psychologist Dr. Alfred Adler. This is where the roots of NLP really start. Dr. Alfred Adler is arguably one of the most significant contributors to the study of psychology within the 20th century. Dr. Adler is probably best known for his now widely practiced school of thought, individual psychology. At the beginning of the 1900s, Sigmund Freud and his studies were remarkably popular. Freud introduced the idea of the individual as being made up of three separate identities: the ID, the ego, and the superego. Friends and colleagues at the time, Adler and Freud met together once each week with several other psychologists in an exclusive convening to discuss recent psychological observation within patients. Adler, however, shifted his direction of thought from Freud. separating himself from psychoanalysis, which was so popular at the time. Adler suggested instead that the individual is an indivisible entity. Each component of an individual affects and is affected by the whole entity, and therefore inseparable. Further, Adler put much more emphasis on the individual's environment as a shaping factor. Instead of observing the individual as an inner workings only machine, the idea of the individual expanded to include the experience and surroundings of the individual. Adler put emphasis on the significance of environment in the early years of an individual's development, such as that from home and school. Adler focused attention on the purpose and technique of individuals to use persuasion and manipulation in communication, and thus was born the study of dark psychology. Dark psychology is a term often used when discussing NLP and persuasion. The basic idea is simply that the individual has darker psychological traits that express themselves when he or she is determined to bring about a certain outcome. These darker traits, and the motivation behind them, began to receive a more organized and disciplined study in the field of psychology. Not only were theories of dark psychology explored and tested, but these concepts were finally being applied in therapy as well. Incidentally, many of the therapeutic practices that stem from the Adlerian school of thought are sound methods with excellent results that are still widely used in therapy today. Adler's psychology took a back seat during but after the war, his earlier, highly influential works of 1914 and 1915 were collected and published. Perhaps one of the most famous concepts to come from these works is Adler's theory of the superiority-inferiority complex. We hear this term commonly today in comparison to an individual with a great need to attain superiority over all others. Adler observed these individuals routinely used persuasion and manipulation, even coercion, to acquire that superiority. Since then, Adler's contributions in individual psychology have allowed for the expansion of further study, theory, and practice in therapy. Adler has inspired the works of today's greatest psychologists like Maslow and Rogers, and even influenced the work of famous Holocaust survivor and neurologist Viktor Frankl. Adler's work has more recently had a significant impact on 21st-century psychologist and professor Del Paul Huss. The next name you'll want to be familiar with for the best understanding of NLP and persuasive communication. Professor Del Paul Huss and his team prefer to study the dark side of psychology. Positive psychology is already saturated with study. It's dark psychology we've been apprehensive to tackle, as an aspect of psychology and the human condition. It's an area that calls into question one's own moral compass. The observer must be of sound substance, but observing in this realm can be highly revealing. It is in this dark realm where Paul Huss makes perhaps his largest contributions to psychology. It's not as if there are some individuals with this capacity and others without the darker aspects of psychology. These dark traits are within us all, and some use it more than others. But we all have this within us. It's not separate. Have you ever told most of the truth, but left out a few key details to save your reputation? Have you ever told a bit of a lie to spare someone's feelings? These behaviors, usual as they are, would be considered dark psychological traits, though they are a far throw from the 4 dark personalities we'll examine in a moment. Paul Huss identified the 3 basic dark personality types: narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. which he called the Dark Triad in 2002. A few years later, Paul has added a fourth dark personality, the everyday sadist. It's important to take a moment here and refresh yourself with each of these personality types. Part of becoming a master of persuasion is to avoid being manipulated or coerced by others. Learn to recognize tendencies and behavior patterns that are reminiscent of the dark personality types. This will help you to spot a dangerous or manipulative situation when one crosses your path. When we hear the term narcissist, it's usually in relation to a person obsessed with themselves. Think of someone who constantly takes and posts selfies on social media. Think of someone who loves to talk about themselves. Think of someone who rarely listens to or shows interest in someone else. Instead, the narcissist will dominate the conversation, interrupt others, and keep the focus of the story on themselves. The narcissist is a great example of someone who may be struggling with an inferiority-superiority complex. These personality traits often go hand in hand. Narcissists tend to be manipulative with the feelings of others, even pitting others against each other and exploiting the situation to achieve a desired outcome. These personality types are also critical of others, and even more so when someone disagrees with them. Narcissists never see themselves at fault and, as a result, blame everyone else for their circumstances rather than take accountability. These individuals tend to place lofty and unattainable expectations on others and speak to them in a demanding way. The entertainment industry would have you believe the psychopath is a mild-mannered motel owner who stalks and kills at night. Or the entertainment industry will try to convince you a psychopath is calling you at home from upstairs. While these are undeniably psychopathic behaviors, it's a pretty drastic and dramatic example. In reality, 1 in every 100 individuals are managing a psychopathic personality disorder of some kind. This can be your bus driver or the car in front of you. It could be the convenience clerk or the cab driver. It could be the local butcher, the ticket stub ripper at the movies. In very general, a psychopathic personality type is someone who exhibits antisocial thoughts and behaviors. In many cases, this is something that can be managed with a healthy strategy and care, but not everyone has access to or accepts that plan. The psychopathic personality type is typically bold and aggressive and proud of themselves. Despite having possibly been the victim of violent or sexual abuse at some time in early childhood, the psychopath often considers themselves above others intellectually and feels, therefore, that people around them are game pieces. Within the political arena is most often where we hear reference to the Machiavellian personality type. This is, most usually, someone of political standing and influence, willing to go to any lengths to gain and maintain political control. This term comes from the 16th century Italian politician Machiavelli of Florence. Machiavelli wrote the infamous works known as The Prince, which is most often referenced when citing the despicable conditions of the government over the people. In The Prince, Machiavelli identifies all the traits and behaviors necessary of a prince. It, like similar books of its time, was thought of as a set of standards and principles by which a young and powerful prince should behave, specifically to gain and hold political power over opponents and the masses. It was ruthless and unforgiving in its suggestions and techniques, demanding that it was a prince's duty to be feared and not loved. The collection of works called for the reader to combine all the worst atrocities into one swift blow for maximum damage in overtaking a village or group. This is why the corrupt opportunist and manipulator is often referred to as the Machiavellian, especially when that individual may be someone in a position of power or politics. In most of these dark personality types, we see these darker traits come forward and express themselves because the individual is wanting of some goal or outcome. In the case of the everyday sadist, the only goal is to inflict pain onto others. These individuals generally have a warped sense of empathy or a lack of empathy. They like to consider themselves the master and punisher of others and attempt to control and dominate the victim. Unfortunately, these personality types can be drawn to jobs and other opportunities that afford them the chance to inflict cruelty on others, such as a prison guard or a dog catcher. The dark personality will prey on the weak, but it is not restricted to a certain demographic. Regardless of gender, ethnicity, orientation, or age, if a person seems to be easily manipulated, they are a target. If a person has low self-esteem and a lack of confidence, that's a target. If a person has nothing big going on and no one in their life, target. A dark personality will prey on the weaknesses, needs, and insecurities of their target to benefit themselves. An exploitable weakness can come in a variety of forms. Senior and elderly individuals are often made the target of internet and telecommunications scams, because it's easy for the dark personality to take advantage of the senior's lack of computer understanding. Similarly, it's easy to prey on children and teens, because these individuals are vulnerable and lack sophisticated judgment. Thus, we see the internet is rife with child predators today. A manipulator is interested in a target because they appear to be easy to control. A manipulator may shower you with attention and gifts and love, but in reality it's to grease you up for persuasion. If you don't go along with the idea, be prepared for the dark personality to do a 180-degree flip and treat you cruelly. This is all part of the ploy to pull at your fears or emotions to get you to comply. If you're aware of what to look for, you can spot a manipulator a mile away and guard against it. If the dark personality learns you are not easily manipulated, they will likely move to an easier target. There are 3 key ideas to learn from psychologist Milton Erickson that will help to solidify the roots and principles of neurolinguistic programming before getting into the practice of the actual techniques. For the best understanding of how these concepts were developed by Erickson, maybe it makes sense to go back to Erickson's childhood. Erickson, by all accounts, did not expect to contribute to the field of psychology at all. In fact, Erickson, who grew up in Wisconsin in the first part of the 20th century, was expecting, as his family was, that he would take up work within the family farming business and continue the tradition. Little did he or his family know, a string of unfortunate illnesses would set him on a completely different path. At a young age, Erickson was afflicted with color blindness and dyslexia, both of which he conquered. Later in life, Erickson attributed his success with overcoming these 2 issues to what he claimed was the unconscious power of his own mind, the auto-hypnotic experiences of Milton H. Erickson was an academic paper published later in his psychology career, which recounted and described his own experience overcoming these issues. This was not the last of Erickson's own personal experiences with the use of the mind to overcome ailments. Again, as a young adult, he developed a case of polio so severe that several doctors were in agreement he would not survive. Erickson lost all function of his limbs and became paralyzed. Eventually, he could not even open his eyes or speak. It was in this state that he experienced his most profound personal experience with the power of the subconscious mind. With literally nothing to do but lay in bed and try not to die, Erikson decided to take control of the one faculty he had left that he felt he could control, his mind. By the deliberate sculpting of the language he used with himself, he was able to convince his subconscious mind, and therefore his body, that he was able to blink and speak and walk again. With his intense and dedicated practice to this frame of thought, Erikson slowly but surely shocked the doctors, making a recovery. Soon enough, he could open his eyes and speak, and even regained the use of his arms. Unsatisfied that his legs were still paralyzed, Erikson prepared for drastic measures. He would shock his legs back into use. He would make them have to work. To do this, he began a solo canoe journey spanning over 1,000 miles across the United States. Erikson figured that in order to survive, his legs would have to remember to work again. Though this may be seen as an extremely risky and unorthodox method of rehabilitation, Erikson was able to walk again by the end of his adventure. It's from these personal experiences that Erikson developed a desire to follow in the field of psychology, and it is from these experiences that three major concepts paved the way for NLP to heal himself and later to heal others. Erikson used three crucial practices, all of which work together in conjunction for the best results. The first practice was to create a story, a metaphor, that the patient could follow along with, and that would play upon the individual's sensory perception. This would stimulate the patient's imagination. For example, when he did this with himself, he would make himself remember what it felt like to walk on different surfaces and what it felt like to bend and lift. At this point, the second practice would come into play. Erikson understood that by activating the imagination, he could bypass the patient's critical thinking modes which were blocking success, and get right into the subconscious mind. With access to the subconscious mind, Erikson could plant suggestions for the patient which were in alignment with rehabilitation and wellness. This is the third practice. By applying the proper techniques and deliberate language, Erikson believed he could guide the patient to generate their own solutions to issues through the imagination and subconscious, which would otherwise not be accessible by way of conscious minds alone. Fast forward to the end of Erikson's career in psychology, California, 1970s. It's here that Erikson meets upcoming psychologists Richard Bandler and John Grinder, and together they develop an organized study of language and pattern in order to elicit deliberate thoughts, actions, and ultimately deliberate results. Though the two men did not yet know one another, and were located on opposite sides of the country, Richard Bandler and John Grinder were headed in the same direction, the office of Milton Erikson. It was the 1960s, and both men had studied and majored in psychology. Both men, too, were coincidentally influenced by Erikson's works, and even held some of the same theological and spiritual beliefs as one another. Grinder, in New York City, had just completed his doctorate in linguistics, and had accepted a position to come and act as an assistant professor of linguistics at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Here, Bandler was just wrapping up his Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy when the two men met and became instant friends and colleagues. Not long afterward, Bandler and Grinder were introduced to Erikson, who at that point was still practicing therapy and teaching techniques to the newest leaders of psychology in and around Santa Cruz. Through the end of the 60s and into the 70s, Bandler and Grinder worked closely with Erickson to develop what would come to be a collection of language and technique that would result in the rapid persuasion of the patient through systematic and deliberate communication. This was the founding of neuro-linguistic programming. Bandler and Grinder continued to teach and practice NLP for decades, and Bandler does still offer workshops and keynote speaking on topics of NLP and communication. There is an indisputable connection between the words we use, the way we translate those words in the mind, and the behaviors that are inspired from this. With the basics covered in individual psychology, dark psychology, and the power of language on the subconscious mind, it's much easier to step into the world of NLP and grasp techniques and their purpose. Next stop, the core of neuro-linguistic programming. NLP revolves around three major concepts. The first major concept to accept is that the world is experienced subjectively by each individual. No two life experiences are alike. Your friend and you may both see the same rainbow, but when you do, the experience of each of you will be at least slightly different. On your internal map of reality, the sight of the rainbow reminds you of the smell of rain. For your friend, the rainbow fires neural connections about the taste of lemonade with the sight of the rainbow. You and your friend may each have a similar point of reference, having seen the rainbow, but internally the experience is unique. What registers can depend on any and all factors of subjective experience up until this point for the individual. Everyone has an internal map of reality, regardless of how accurate it is. The second major concept is that the mind is the sum of a conscious and unconscious, or subconscious, mind, each serving the individual in distinct ways. It's possible to suspend the conscious and analytical mind in order to access the subconscious, or unconscious. The subconscious mind is the most effective place to program a desired outcome. The third major concept is referred to as modeling. Modeling is simply to reproduce the thoughts and behaviors of another in oneself in order to model another with the purpose of recreating their success and excellence in oneself. With these three concepts in mind, you can move next to what is often called the 4 pillars of wisdom in the NLP world. The purpose of the 4 pillars of neuro-linguistic programming is to help those who practice it to see that though they may be moving rapidly along and gaining the happiness and success they set out for using that NLP and persuasion, only a fraction of what is possible is truly being accomplished. There is so much more untapped potential. You may think you have a good idea of what you want, but is that really accurate? Many times, individuals think they've set some positive and terrific goal for themselves, but upon further inspection, the goal isn't actually what the individual really wanted, and there hasn't been a deadline set on when to get it. The individual's goals are too loosely set. Putting a deadline on a goal increases the odds of holding accountable to the goal and working at it a little at a time. The individual might also forget to define some way of knowing when the goal is met. The goal can be to build a home. But how are you to know when to call the home finished? When the frame is complete? When all the paint is dry? When the furniture is just right? When the lawn and gardens are perfect? Define when the house is considered done. There should be a measurement you can use so you know when the project is achieved. That's not to say you'll never make another change to the home. If your first goal is well managed and complete, You'll likely have more goals in mind. The point, though, is to know what done looks like for a goal. Another piece of goal setting that can slow individuals down is never taking small and incremental action. It's the small steps that make or break the final result. Consider most of the resolutions made on New Year's Eve. Virtually all of them are well-intentioned. Individuals like you, wanting to make changes to better one's circumstances. But how many of these resolutions get fulfilled? The individual has every intention of meeting the goal. It's written in the diary, but when the alarm goes off, the excuse is something like you didn't get enough sleep, or you'll start tomorrow. One thing is certain: whichever action is taken most frequently, taking the small step or delaying it will lead to an equal outcome. All the way there, or stalled. If the individual sets a goal to run a marathon, but spends most of the training time binge-watching Netflix shows, the individual will be a knowledgeable master of the newest episodes, but with no marathon finish time or ribbon. Don't set the goal and walk away. Define the goal. Set time in your day for the goal. Keep the appointment. When you have a goal in mind, it can be common to see only tunnel vision for the goal and block out everything else going on around you. This is not the practice of a master of his or her program. A train conductor knows that when a goal is set and the train is in motion, he or she must keep an acute peripheral vision. Every moment the train is in motion is another opportunity for greatness or challenge to cross the path. If tunnel vision is the only sight, signs for shortcuts and warnings about falling rocks will go unseen. Danger is ahead. It's important to be aware of and receptive to the information and resources available in any direction at any time. Practice engaging all of your senses as it relates to your desired outcome to sharpen your acuity to reading your surroundings and using your resources. Exercising your ability to adapt and bend is going to serve you well in goal setting. Adaptation is a vital skill for survival in many of life's situations, and the same is true here. A goal needs to be clear. Yes, but not set in stone. Your moving train should be able to wind around the corners, cross water, climb mountains, and switch tracks. If your train is not flexible enough to adapt to changes in your environment, it risks plummeting off the tracks. You have to be able to adapt and change the due date or a resource when necessary. Understanding and implementing these 4 principles will help you to maximize your desired outcome, and subsequently, your quality of life. For each goal you set, practice these 4 pillars of wisdom. For an effective suggestion to be planted in the mind of the individual, it is crucial that the conscious and analytical mind is bypassed by imagination if you can, so that the subconscious mind is accessible. For this bypass to take place and be effective, an induction from beta brainwave to alpha must occur, and then, ideally, from alpha to theta. This is the most effective entrance to a trance state. The fastest, and arguably the most popular method for induction, is to create a confusion state. The confusion state interrupts the individual's usual pattern of thought and makes a new neural connection and a new mark on the internal map of reality. A simple but clear example of this is one very commonly used in NLP, and stems from a method Erickson used himself, called the handshake method. Imagine you are introduced to Erickson. You both begin to extend your hands in what would be the usual social behavior in this or any similar meet-and-greet circumstance. But at the last second, instead of gripping your hand for a shake, Erickson gently grabs and holds your wrist for a brief moment. This subconsciously catches you off guard. In this instant, your internal map of reality is adjusted to fit all the times a handshake occurred, except that one time a wrist shake occurred instead. A new mark on the map. The next time Erickson really wants the attention of your subconscious mind, he only needs to gently grab and hold your wrist for a moment to gain it. The quickest and most effective way to hold an individual in a highly suggestible state is to maintain a trance state for the individual. Inducing a trance state, in the case of NLP and hypnosis, is to assist the patient with the natural transition from beta brainwaves to alpha, and eventually theta brainwaves. You know this is a process that every human naturally cycles through every day. Hold the individual in a place of extreme relaxation and focus, and continue to engage the imagination with sensory perception of the desired outcome. Guide the individual through the steps still needed to complete the goal. Allow the individual to practice adaptation in their plan so it's a comfortable and familiar experience. Tantalize the imagination by asking the individual to go into detail when they imagine themselves completing the goal. What will your hands feel like? What will your heart feel? What will you see and hear? Will you be alone? What will it mean to accomplish this goal? What will you do first when the goal is finished? Questions like these will help to keep the individual in a highly sensitive and highly suggestible state. The seeds planted here take root in the subconscious soils of the mind. As you already know, metaphor and story are powerful tools for NLP. One of the best ways to maintain a trance state and plant suggestions is with the use of story and metaphor. The best way to penetrate the rich soil of the subconscious mind is with a story. It's said that there are really only 3 or 4 kinds of stories that actually exist. The great comedy, the great tragedy, the great adventure, and the great metamorphosis are these basic premises. Every other story is just a copy in a different pen stroke. You can use these basic story forms to take the subconscious mind on an exciting and emotional roller coaster ride. In whichever form suits best, take the hero on his or her journey. Create a story to help the individual's subconscious mind experience the sensations of the desired outcome. With subtle access to the subconscious mind through use of metaphor, the mind will accept ideas and suggestions without resistance as an imagination. Because the suggestions were made at a highly susceptible time, the individual will be profoundly affected by the words and can more easily move to the desired outcome without restriction. Because stories are so relatable and potent for humans, you can use them to establish deliberate marks on the individual's internal map of reality. To follow are some of the most core and most popular techniques used in NLP. In the big picture, there are actually dozens or even hundreds of NLP techniques already developed and in practice, but more are being developed every year by practitioners like Tony Robbins. The techniques covered in this chapter have the greatest results among professionals, have received the most attention and academic study, or are the most commonly used by professionals. Keep in mind that while these techniques may seem to work like magic, it's regular application of practice that makes them so effective. A suggestion planted in the subconscious mind generally needs time to grow. Repetition and reinforcement is what will nurture the seeds you plant and strengthen the neural connections in the mind. ethical persuasion. It's not so much about crossing a line. It's about your true intentions. The difference between negative and positive manipulation is not necessarily whether it's covert or whether it attempts to change a belief. It's about ethics. If you can be relatively sure you're going against a core belief, or something your prospect would not want, it's not ethical. If you would not want it done to you, it's probably not ethical. If it causes harm to your prospect, it's probably not ethical. If you have to threaten or force someone to accomplish your goal, it's coercion and it's definitely unethical. You can use the art of persuasion and manipulation without being two-faced and deceptive. There's nothing wrong with wanting it all. You deserve what you want, and you can have it, but you must remember that if you're entitled to what you want, so is everyone around you. You must use your powers for good and not diminish anyone else's pursuit for happiness. Respect the others around you, and respect the art. You'll experience a greater sense of accomplishment and pride. Knowledge of these basic concepts isn't hard, but people are largely unaware of them, or aware of them on a subconscious level only. Learning the art of influence and how to apply these techniques puts you ahead of the crowd. With this information, you have a toolkit to use in any interaction you have. You'll be able to manage the interaction with confidence and authority, and communicate your intentions and expectations clearly. Then all you have left is to watch the situation play out as you desire. Some individuals, businesses, and leaders conduct in an underhanded, dirty way. They may think this is the only way to manipulate in order to get what they want. Really, this is just lazy persuasion. It should be understood that if you need to coerce someone into your way, you have not changed their way of thinking. You have not convinced them you are correct. You've only trapped them. To truly persuade, you need to convince someone that you are right, not by challenging their basic beliefs, but by using them to support your case. You are not a lazy or underhanded persuader. You are becoming a master of the art, and therefore need not waste your time with unethical manipulation. Professional speakers and motivators like famous author and speaker Tony Robbins know this and take the time to learn and implement practical and constructive methods of persuasion for the benefit of themselves and their audience. Robbins is a life coach that regularly speaks at seminars in order to inspire large groups of goal seekers. He teaches individuals how to remove negative thought patterns and replace them with positive ones that suit the individual for their goal. Because of all Robbins has learned and practiced himself, he is able to walk confidently onto the stage in perfect command of his body language and his entire visual and verbal presentation. Just as you will be. You will soon know the perfect timing in conversation, in which to drop just the right, impressive piece of communication to hook your audience. Career that obeys the philosophies of deliberate communication lawyers and attorneys, especially when it comes to trial lawyers. These professional persuaders represent clients in significant court cases, arguing in their client's support and defense. A case like this requires deliberate thinking and communication to build a rapport with the jury and judge. A trial lawyer also guides the client in deliberate body language and deliberate speech for the best possible results in the trial. Without these skills, the lawyer would not be able to best serve the client in defense of his or her rights. Persuasion is a necessary tool for this professional. If you can see all involved in the manipulation of a trial case, you can probably pretty easily recognize this is only compounded in the case of political leaders. Part of the power and magic of persuasive communication, especially in today's world, is that it doesn't always matter whether the communication contains truth and facts. What really matters is how others react to it emotionally. We see this more so now than ever in politics. Coaches, speakers, lawyers, politicians, and leaders are only a few of the fine professions to make fundamental use of persuasion. The success that these individuals experience can be the success you experience from your own application of these tools. Next, let's take a look at more of these tools to help you on your path to achievement. Chapter 2. Read those around you. The energy of the mind is the essence of life. Aristotle, philosopher. By now, you have a clear understanding of what the art of persuasion is, and you know of several examples of it. You've seen it at work in today's media, and you can find examples of this art in the works of coaches, trainers, lawyers, politicians, and other leaders. But you also know there's more to influencing a situation than that. The mind map. You may recall me mentioning briefly the internal map of reality, or the mind map, from earlier. This is the map of reality we form in our own mind based on our experiences throughout life. We develop this map so that we can make faster, safer, and more valuable decisions in the moment. However, building this map can limit us sometimes as much as it's meant to help. When we build a map of what we consider reality in our minds, we react to that map instead of actual reality. For example, if you touch the hot stove once, you remember the next time to avoid that, thanks to the information stored in the mind map. You don't need to touch it again to know. We use experiences to build the map of what's possible and what's expected, in order to handle circumstances and conditions in a faster and safer way. The brain has adapted this practice over hundreds of thousands of years to keep us safe from harm. That's one example of the mind map being of service and protection to us. How about an example of when this backfires? Let's say an individual finds themselves in a new career position. This is a position they want and love to have, but it definitely comes with heavy weight and responsibility. To deal with this stress, the individual takes up a behavior to calm their nerves at the end of the day, an alcoholic beverage. As the individual imbibes, the stresses of the day begin to dissolve. Through this experience, the individual learns of the relaxation that comes with the behavior. This has seemingly squashed the problem of stress and anxiety. The next evening, the same thing. Stress and anxiety is lessened with a drink. Now the individual has walked this path on the mind map at least twice. The story is reinforced that when feelings of stress occur, a drink will help the individual. The individual continues to treat feelings of stress and anxiety with a drink, and as you probably suspect, the individual ends up turning to this seeming solution more and more frequently. Not just for work stress, but because of stressors elsewhere in the individual's life. An argument with a friend, a train delay, an overdue bill. All of these conditions set the individual to drinking as a means of coping. Not even at night anymore. Sometimes at lunch. Sometimes at breakfast. Not just one drink anymore. Obviously, this behavior compromises the individual's ability to perform at work or be a supportive friend. The individual sacrifices mental well-being and physical health. We see that the coping mechanism, which was originally understood as a solution, is now its own problem. The path that says, drink to relieve stress, has been traveled so many times that it's the only path the individual ever uses now. It's the learned and practiced go-to response on the internal map of reality, the piece we actually respond to, rather than responding to reality itself. In reality, drinking is not the only mechanism for stress relief. We who have not tread the path of drink to relieve stress so heavily are capable of recognizing dozens of other ways a person can relieve stress, many of them quite healthy behaviors as an alternative. But if your map says something is impossible, you tend to believe it's impossible even if, in real life, that's not true. However, the mind map is not etched in stone. It's a malleable and elastic tool you probably didn't even realize was already in your toolbox. See, you configured the map and you can reconfigure it. It just takes generating intentional thoughts and ignoring the thoughts that are no longer serving you in your goals and expectations. When a thought is repeated enough and becomes well practiced, the trail on the mind map becomes well worn. Let's imagine that you've applied for a credit card multiple times in the last couple of years, but because your credit history has some derogatory marks on it, your experience has been that you get denied. This forms a path on the mind map that says it's just not going to happen for you. You need better credit history, more time, more money, whatever. Each time you have this experience, and even when you just think about the experience, the path on the mind maps is reinforced. The elastic mind. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to detect and organize all of the information one is exposed to throughout life. The general idea of neuroplasticity dates back to at least the 1700s, when through years of dedicated experimentation and dissection, it was discovered that animals which had been trained to perform new tricks throughout their lifetime had a substantially larger cerebellum than the animals who had not been trained. This information suggested that the brain adapted and grew in capacity if it was given the opportunity for new information. These studies were largely forgotten, and neuroplasticity did not return until nearly 100 years later, when these concepts were again examined and then promptly forgotten. The passage of almost another century brings us to the current study of neuroplasticity, which made a sensational return in the 1970s. Until then, it was generally accepted that the brain's structure and operations were for the most part permanently fixed and could not be changed. As technology allowed us to take an ever closer view of the brain and its systems in action, we learned that this assumption was very untrue. Like the brains of those trained animals hundreds of years earlier, we too show significant evidence of an elastic mind that adapts both structure and operation as new information and conditions are introduced. It was the study of individuals who had experienced a stroke or similar brain injury that started to reveal intense findings. These individuals had suffered some form of damage to the brain which limited or eliminated the ability for part of the brain to perform a given function. However, over time, and actually pretty quickly, the brain's structure would change and the operation would return in some other way. The operation was rerouted around the damage. Damaged neural connections were bypassed and new neural connections occurred in undamaged parts of the brain. The findings were astonishing. Since then, neuroplasticity has taken on an entirely new level of interest, and it continues today. In fact, there are even games and online apps now designed to exercise neuroplasticity with memory games and lateral thinking puzzles. Other activities, too, can improve one's overall neuroplasticity. Simply by reading this book right now, you're improving your elastic mind. Playing a musical instrument is also a very popular activity that strengthens the neuroplastic capabilities of one's brain. If you love to travel and visit new places, good news. This too is a fantastic way to expose your brain to new information, circumstances, and challenges, all of which strengthen the brain. For us, the implications are huge. The mind map really can be rewritten and adapted. If the mind can be told what to believe about something unconstructive, surely we can tell our brains new stories that work to deliver us to our goals. Brainwave functionality. Since you'll be referring to the subconscious mind moving forward with the art of influence, it will help to refresh what you know about brainwave functionality. As you may be aware, human beings exhibit multiple brainwave functions on a daily basis. As an individual wakes from sleep and begins to perform the morning regimen, the brainwave functionality continues to change. On the way to work and throughout the day, the individual passes through multiple phases of brainwave functionality. The flow from one brainwave function to the next is a natural occurrence that happens for all human beings, all the time. We normally shift from one to the other as if we're moving through a scale. The scale moves from beta brainwaves to alpha waves, then to theta brainwaves. Beta brainwaves can be thought of in comparison to the critical mind, concentrating, ever assessing and making decisions based upon stimuli. Alpha brainwaves are closer to that magic spot, the subconscious mind. In this state, you find yourself relaxing. This is probably your brainwave functionality as you're watching a movie or even reading this book. This is generally a state of calm where the imagination is allowed to unfold. The magic spot is really in the theta brainwaves. You've probably been in the theta state at least once in the last 24 hours if you've been asleep. If you've ever been hypnotized, you've experienced the theta state. If you've ever found yourself lucid dreaming, you've been in theta state. There is another brainwave functionality, delta waves. If you've gone too far, you're in delta mode. That's okay. It's excellent rest. Delta mode is what's happening when you experience and sleep. As someone who wants to ignite your prospect's imagination, you're aiming for something between the alpha state and the beta state, but it can definitely depend on the person and the circumstance. For example, you're definitely not going to be able to lull a sales prospect or a romantic interest into a hypnotic trance in order to influence them on the spot, so you'll need tactics that are built for the subconscious, but interact on a conscious, logical level. The individual's protector and decision-maker is the conscious mind, the beta brainwave machine. This is the critical thinking, logical mind that constantly surveys its surroundings and catalogs data. This is the mind that is learning and concentrating and keeping us safe and comfortable from the day's stimuli. Imagine you're driving down the road to a place you've been hundreds of times. It's almost as if your car itself, knows the way automatically. You know the way to go so automatically that your mind begins to wander. You think about what you should have said to that person the other day, or what tasks are waiting for you at home. This is your mind in alpha brainwave mode. But of course, the beta mind is still focused on safely driving the road it knows. Before long, you look around and you're halfway there and you don't even remember the first part of the drive. You continue leisurely along in alpha mode, winding the route you know so well you don't even need to think about it. and suddenly a deer runs out in front of your car. Your beta mind engages immediately, responding to the sudden stimuli and reacting fast enough to slow and swerve and miss the deer. Alpha thoughts left swiftly behind. The conscious mind. The conscious, analytical mind and beta brainwave function is critical for survival, but it's not the most conducive for making effective suggestions because the analytical mind will latch onto data to filter and sift and compare against what it knows already. The critical mind could essentially talk you out of any deliberate suggestion before it even gets planted in the subconscious mind where it can begin to take hold. You might tell yourself consciously that you're going to finally close this big client by the end of the month, but your critical mind will be quick to point out that you haven't closed them yet, or that you've never closed a deal this large. In fact, no one at your company has closed a deal this large. As many scenarios as the conscious mind can think of to guard against. It will. In doing so, it kills any hopeful thought before it takes root. Contrary to how it sounds, the conscious mind is not doing this to harm you but to help you. It's weighing as much information as it can to make sure you're safe and comfortable. If the conscious mind thinks that a loss of income on this deal is a safety concern, it will do all it can to guard against that, including act like you will not be getting it. Instead of acting upon a healthy seed you could have planted in the subconscious mind, the body acts in accordance with what the critical mind says. The unconscious mind. The unconscious mind is a bit of a mystery to psychology, but as we continue to explore, we find the unconscious mind to be wider and deeper than we could have expected. Comprehensive studies have been conducted and evidence gathered to suggest the unconscious mind is where we store instincts and automatic reactions, as well as hidden phobias and desires. It's also suggested that the unconscious mind is where we hold repressed feelings and psychological complexes. It is in the unconscious mind where subliminal perception takes place. The concept of the unconscious mind has become a part of our language and culture through the famous works of psychoanalysts Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. Jung, and especially Freud, would frequently tap into the unconscious minds of patients by analyzing dreams and forgotten memories. You're likely familiar with the Freudian slip, which is another revealing act of the unconscious. A Freudian slip is a slip of the tongue that reveals, unconsciously, your true feelings about a subject. This usually comes out as a word you didn't mean to say, instead of the word you tried to say. The unconscious mind is also the resting place for trillions of bits of information collected throughout a lifetime and organized into a pattern. To organize patterns, the mind groups information into stories. It's suggested that by putting information into the form of a story, complete with emotion, that the brain is able to process and store a higher concentration of information. Humans have an inherent need to organize information into story form, consciously and unconsciously. If we know the mind in all of its forms is strong with organizing a story format, then we, as influencers and persuaders, can use this information. The next time you want to get a point across, try telling it as a story and see if this is a more effective method to getting at your audience with emotion. The subconscious mind willingly follows the storyline and believes what it's told, so be sure to plan deliberately what your message will convey. The subconscious mind. We've mentioned briefly the role of the subconscious mind in terms of its usefulness in persuasion, but now we look closer and spend a little more time understanding how the subconscious mind works and how we can use the subconscious mind as a tool to develop positive persuasion tactics. The subconscious mind is a mysterious creature and your own imaginary genius. The imagination, for all intents and purposes, lives in the subconscious mind. Imagination works so well for us daydreamers and fantasizers because, within the house of the subconscious mind, there is no delineation between fantasy and reality. There is only the story being told to the subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind accepts the story as true and possible on all counts. No, only does the subconscious mind accept the story it's being told, it begins to act in accordance with it. A basic example of this is that in reality, we believe we cannot fly. But in a dream, when the conscious mind sleeps and the subconscious mind plays, we can fly and defy all kinds of physics. What this means for you, Master Persuader, is that if you keep feeding yourself, or someone else, negative stories about losing at life, your subconscious mind believes this. It acts in accordance with this, looking for every shred of evidence in your life to prove you right. Further, it's not just your subconscious mind that acts in accordance with these stories. Your body will start to act in accordance with these stories, too. Before you know it, mentally and physically, you're actually living a reality of these thoughts you've been repeating. For a better example, think of a movie you've recently watched that has a scary or touching moment. The movie actually makes you jump in fear, or cry in sadness for the story. It's the subconscious mind that prompts these very real physiological responses. Of course, you don't run and hide when the killer is coming, and you don't call 911 to help the injured character. Your conscious mind recognizes that this is only a story. It's not real. But you shed emotion during the movie because the subconscious mind is also engaged in the story and acting in accordance. It believes the story it's being told and produces emotions and physiological reactions that match the story. So if the subconscious mind believes what you tell it, there must be a way to benefit from this. There is. Hypnosis, like cinema, utilizes this law to introduce new ideas to the mind, and the mind map to replace negative thoughts and behaviors. In hypnosis, the conscious mind is bypassed through a trance-like state in order to get directly at the subconscious mind, with the logical mind resting. Much like when we dream, our alpha and theta brainwaves are engaged and the subconscious can listen and act in accordance to a new story. A story, perhaps, telling you that you do actually have the power to stop smoking, lose weight, or overcome fears. A hypnotist will walk a patient through a story about this, taking care to prompt the imagination to experience what it's like to pull a cigarette from the pack, but then not want it. The hypnotist essentially tells the story that has not been highly trafficked on the mind map yet, the one that's beneficial. This way, a new story, or a new path on the mind map, gets tread and reinforced, and there's no overthinking, overly critical mind to stop the story. When the patient finds him or herself in everyday life and automatically reaches for the pack of cigarettes, they are more apt to stop in mid-reach, because the path of, "I don't need this," is now as heavily walked as the old story. "I can't quit, so how can we utilize this magic?" Be cognizant of the story, paths you've been hiking for a while, and how you might tell yourself a new story about the topic which is more beneficial to you, one that will elicit the emotional and physiological response that benefits you. While we don't all know how to implement the techniques of certified hypnosis, it doesn't mean the exercise is lost on us. There are opportunities in your day when alpha and theta brainwaves are more at your disposal. With practice, like that of meditation, you can actually bring yourself to this state and prompt alpha and theta brainwaves. Get yourself here and repeat, repeat, repeat the stories and imaginings that will be more beneficial to you. The magic is that if we can convince our minds of something, the mind and body begins to act in accordance with it. Take inventory of all the non-serving stories you repeat automatically, because the mind regularly walks those paths. Begin to replace these ideas with serving ones that will lead you to your goal, and repeat them in any way you like, at least daily. Set aside a few minutes to allow yourself to daydream. Make up the details of a story about how you accomplished the thing you want and how good it feels to have it. Imagine how your life looks now that you have the thing you want. Think of what you do with it and what it looks like to do things with it. Allow your imagination wonder and encourage yourself to feel the emotions about your good-feeling story. As you continue to repeat this positive story, it gains strength in reality and your mind and body subconsciously believe it. Practice this enough, and your mind will be scouring your life experience for every shred of evidence to support your story. You've learned already from Adler and Erickson that accessing the imagination state is crucial if deliberate suggestions are to be successfully planted in the individual's subconscious mind. It is in this state that story and metaphor become irresistible, and the imaginative and creative subconscious mind follows the story. You also know that once that imagination state is achieved, the individual is highly susceptible to the deliberate suggestions planted there. These suggestions, delivered in this highly suggestive state, draft the edits for the internal map of reality. New pathways are being forged or old ones being awakened for deliberate purpose and influence. By editing the internal map of reality, the expectation of the outcome is sculpted for the individual in a light that is beneficial and delivers the desired result. By reinforcing those neural connections repeatedly, the expectation forms into a belief. The subconscious mind must act in accordance with this belief. If the subconscious belief is strong enough, this will be exhibited in the physiology and behavior of the individual's body. Remember, the subconscious mind believes what it's told. It does not distinguish between what is reality and what is fiction in the way the conscious, critical, analytical mind does. The body must obey and act in accordance with the subconscious mind. If you can gain access to the subconscious mind and tell it a deliberate story of success and define for the individual the desired outcome as a certain expectation, you can tap into existing beliefs and memories, especially sensory memories, to accommodate this expectation and make it not only believable, but regularly practiced and imagined in the mind. With the new expectation, know the individual's internal map of reality. The path to the desired outcome is obvious and easy. If you can combine the power of the imagination at work in the subconscious mind with the power of expectation at work in the subconscious mind, you can sit back and watch the desired outcome unfold in real time. Now you have reacquainted yourself with the different levels of consciousness, and you've made a connection between these states of consciousness and the brainwave functionality happening at each of them. With this, you've gone deeper into understanding the internal map of reality we all use in our day-to-day life, and you've seen that there are ways to change that map for your betterment. You see how neuroplasticity plays a part in our changing, expanding minds, and thus in the understanding and reactions to our world and our beliefs. Chapter 3. Body Language Basics. Who is Mike Judge? Let me think. The only way I could possibly answer that question would be in a non-verbal fashion. I think I could do an interpretive dance that would answer that question for you. Mike Judge, writer, producer, director. Think back to one of the most recent interactions you've had. Perhaps this was a situation at work, or at the store, or at a recent event. Take a moment to think back to that scene. Remember where you were, who was there, what was being discussed or done. Think of the details of the moment. Try to see yourself there again. Now consider the posture you were standing with and the posture others around you were holding. Ask yourself if anyone had their arms crossed. Were they looking toward the door? Each of these small details is revealing information about you, or about others around you. These details can be used to move the interaction along in a positive and beneficial way, or they can clue you into someone else's true intentions. Posture is a common way for us to gauge someone's self-confidence and their self-image. In a typical case, a slouching posture can be indicative of someone with a lower level of self-confidence and self-worth than someone who stands tall. However, a stance can be too aggressive or too close to the personal space of another, and you will be perceived as overbearing. Posture is one of the first pieces of body language we perceive to either consciously or subconsciously draw inferences from it about the person. The three communicators. We pick up information about posture as soon as we get a visual of someone. But there is another tactic we can use discreetly to help you identify some basics about a prospect. The tactic is to look for certain clues that tell you whether your prospect is a visual, auditory, or kinesthetic sort of individual. Though there are plenty of similarities amongst us in human behavior, one of the ways we differ from one another is by the ways in which we best digest information from the world around us. We use our 5 senses to register information, but one of our senses stands out as dominant against the others. This is typically indicative of the type of person you are and the ways in which you best digest details about your surroundings. There are 3 dominant senses we use to take in and retain information: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. Though most of us use all of these senses for absorbing information, the visual personality type is the most common amongst us, making up about 75% of people. Concepts and memories are mainly stored in the mind as visual images and pictures. When they speak, visual people tend to use language that pertains to vision in order to express themselves. For example, a visual person might say, "I see what you mean. Let's keep an eye on it. To watch what happens when I go in there." Physically, the visual person will generally stand with an upright, front-facing posture. This person is typically well-dressed and put together because they tend to be more concerned with their visual appearance. When a visual individual is experiencing stress, it tends to be gathered and held in the shoulder area. This might look like the shoulders rounding and pulling up toward the ears, or it might look like the shoulders pulling back and forcing the spinal area to stiffen. That's not to say all individuals with visible tension in their shoulders are absolutely visual people, but it's quite common, and it would be a smart piece of information to intuit, even if you end up changing your mind later based on more information about the person. When visual people are trying to remember something, they tend to look upwards. This causes them to develop wrinkles in the center of the forehead. These individuals tend to have thin lips instead of full lips, which is subconsciously indicative of a responsible, practical personality type. This individual is comfortable making regular eye contact, and they actually start to feel uneasy if others will not make eye contact with them. For this personality, eye contact is an important part of building trust in the rapport, and it's an indication to them that you're paying attention as they speak. The auditory personality type accounts for about 20 of the people we interact with. Concepts and memories are primarily stored in the mind as sounds, noises, melodies, and quotes. When they speak, auditory people tend to use language that pertains to hearing and sound in order to express themselves. For example, an auditory person might say, "This plan sounds better all the time." "I hear what you're saying." An alarm went off in my mind when I saw him. Physically, the auditory personality type may not be as well dressed or as concerned with appearance as the visual personality. This is because the visual representation of themselves to others is less important to them than the information they share through talking, sound, and voice. The auditory individual doesn't enjoy eye contact as much as visual people. In situations where eye contact would be normal, the auditory person may avoid it. Contrary to the way it may appear to some, this is not a sign of disrespect or disinterest. The auditory person looks down, looks at relevant papers, or moves a pen around on paper making a subtle sound. This is actually the auditory person concentrating on what you're saying. Eye contact would be more uncomfortable and therefore distracting. Rather than be distracted, the auditory individual is looking somewhere arbitrary in order to focus on the sound of what you're saying. This is the type of personality that clicks their pen, taps their foot, or drums quietly on the table. This is the most effective way for these individuals to digest, process, and store information. They are creating a memorable and meaningful experience with the information to be saved in the mind by sound patterns, which makes the information easier to recall in the future. The kinesthetic personality type is the hugger. They account for about 5 of the individuals we interact with. This is the type of individual who likes to get to know you by sharing personal space with you and touching in various ways. Like the visual and the auditory personalities, the kinesthetic person will speak in ways that use a touch and feeling-based vocabulary. They might use phrases like, the two go hand in hand. Let me walk you through it. I have a bad gut feeling about this. This individual wants to be near others and wants to get a sense for a person's vibe by spending time with them in the same, surely small, space. They tend to be the touchy-feely kind of person who prefers to build a rapport based on physicality and feelings. They love to connect with others, even in platonic ways, with a touch on the arm or shoulder. You'll always find the kinesthetic person dressed for comfort. If you interact with kinesthetic people, or you are a kinesthetic personality yourself, it's important to keep a few things in mind for the most successful interactions. Remember that while kinesthetic people like to touch in order to communicate, not everyone else does. In fact, some people are very put off by physical contact. For some individuals, it's distracting to have their personal space disrupted, so they prefer not to hug or make affectionate gestures. It's important to respect both sides of the interaction and come to a sort of subconscious compromise. If you're the kinesthetic person interacting with primarily visual and auditory people, acknowledge that the majority of people are not kinesthetic communicators. Yours is a small category of individuals. While there are plenty of visual and auditory personalities that still appreciate hugs and the like, it's still not necessarily the way they best absorb information. When you're building a rapport, a touch can be a good thing. But if your intention is to educate or persuade an individual, you will want to use an approach that matches their personality type for the best results. If you're a kinesthetic person testing the waters to see if others are receptive to touch, you can start slow and see how it goes. But you must pay attention and take notice of the subtle cues from the individual. An overbearing kinesthetic approach is the fastest to get shut down, because instincts for protection subconsciously come up. Depending on the situation, it can be nice to start with a light and casual form of contact, such as a handshake or an elbow-to-elbow bump, as an accent to a conversation piece. As you build a rapport, you will be able to determine if you can communicate with this individual in a more tactical way. If you're not the kinesthetic personality and you don't like to touch, you don't have to. But understand that most people do use contact of some sort for basic communication, so be prepared. If you're okay with a handshake, you can extend your hand a second before others to subconsciously set a boundary of your personal space. If your hand is very extended from yourself, others will get the message to respect the space around your body. This establishes a point of contact for others, but comfortably signals a boundary. Gestures and expressions with a solid grasp on how we instinctively react, and which factors play a part in our reactions. You are capable of an overall assessment of someone, or yourself, looking for clues of whether they are more likely to be visual, auditory, or kinesthetic will give you more insight and leverage for your interaction. But there's another layer deeper we can go. Next, let's take a look at the most commonly used subconscious expressions and gestures and what they mean. An easy way to interpret someone's comfort level by looking at their face is to pay attention to his or her eyebrows. Eyebrows can be very revealing about the level of relaxation for others around you. Eyebrows that relax to the outside of the brow are generally comfortable in the interaction. A raised eyebrow is often a sign of interest or skepticism. To determine which, try to look for other clues in gesture and expression. Both raised eyebrows is a sign that an individual is feeling surprise, fear, or worry. The side glance is a subconscious movement that also reveals when an individual is nervous or uncomfortable. The eyes looking to the side are searching subconsciously for an exit from the interaction. Lips can be a little more difficult to read, and the takeaway can be rather vague, but typically those with fuller, larger lips tend to be more free-spirited, childlike, and even immature. Those with thinner lips are perceived as more responsible and mature. Though we might not mean to, we do read into the shape of people's lips. Next time you're in a crowd, take note of whether individuals have thin or full lips and whether that trait seems to match up with other inferences you may be able to draw out from speech and body language. Nodding is an interesting trait to observe because we, at least in the Western world, tend to use nods to mean a variety of things from mundane to sinister. The trick here, like eye contact, is in the context. A person could be nodding to subconsciously signal you to hurry along your conversation. Or they could be nodding because they want to express concern and care for your emotions, or agreement with your statements. Look for other behaviors that might help you to refine your assessment. People tend to touch their jaw or chin with a hand when they're making decisions in their mind. However, there's a difference in doing this seriously and doing this behavior to appear as though a decision is being made when one is really not. There's a long history of this gesture being linked to contemplation or decision-making. From Shakespeare to Bugs Bunny. People also make this gesture when they want you to think they are making a decision or consideration. For this reason, you should pay extra close attention to where the person's eyes are pointed when they do this. If a genuine decision is being made, the individual's eyes will likely be pointed down and to one side when they touch their jaw or chin. If this same gesture is made, but the person's eyes are looking straight ahead or at you, the consideration is likely a false one. Stance and feet are also an important communication tool to take note of. The distance between your feet, the direction they're pointing, and whether they're crossed can all be indications of how open a person is in conversation. If a person's feet are pointed toward you and a shoulder distance apart, they're likely more willing to share information with you and trust you. If feet are pointing toward a door, close together or crossed, the individual is guarded and may have some emotional walls up. If feet are placed more than shoulder distance apart, the stance is an aggressive one. Crossed arms or legs are a strong subconscious sign that an individual is closed off to the interaction. This may be out of an exaggerated need to protect oneself in general, but it could also be a sign that they are specifically untrusting of the person to whom they are conversing. The combination of NLLIP and communication, in addition to what you already know, there are a few fundamental persuasion techniques to learn in order to capture your best results. Next, you'll review how to use metaphors and stories to strengthen and clarify your conversation, and how to use other persuasive conversation techniques like modeling, anchoring, and reframing. Coupling these techniques with the information you already know now about human reaction will deliver maximum benefit from your interaction. As you already know, metaphor and story are powerful tools for persuasion. The best way to penetrate the rich soil of the subconscious imagination is with a story. It's been suggested that there are only 3 or 4 types of stories that truly exist: the great comedy, the great tragedy, the great adventure, and the great metamorphosis are these basic premises. Every other story is just a copy in a different pen stroke. You can use these basic story forms to take the subconscious mind on an exciting and emotional roller coaster ride. In whichever form suits best, take the hero on his or her journey. Create a story to help the individual's subconscious mind experience the sensations of the desired outcome. Commercials use this method all the time. With subtle access to the subconscious mind through use of metaphor, the mind will accept ideas and suggestions without resistance. Because the suggestions were made at a highly susceptible time, the individual will be profoundly affected by the words and can more easily move to the desired outcome without resistance. Stories are so relatable and potent for humans. You can use them to establish deliberate marks on the individual's subconscious. There are several types of modeling that are used for persuasion, but one of the most commonly used versions is the act of modeling what the other person is doing in order to build a rapport subconsciously. When the person with whom you're speaking smiles, you too smile. Mimicking the person you're talking with can quickly lower walls and help everyone to feel that you understand them and you're listening. You must temper this approach. However, modeling everything, or at strange moments, can be suspicious and off-putting, making others feel almost as if you're offering sarcastic enthusiasm. Very common example of modeling we especially see today is modeling within chat, email, and SMS. In text and chat, there's an initial common ground we generally all start at: polite, casual, professional. And though abbreviations may be a part of the text, slang is usually not. As we become more familiar with the people we talk to, we start to use slang. As one of us uses it, the other of us feels comfortable being more casual and also starts to use slang. If one of us uses lol, the other of us feels comfortable to start using abbreviated text slang. If one of us drops a swear word, the other of us feels less inhibited about watching what we say. Similarly, if one of us gets a bit more casual in a text conversation, and the other of us does not follow suit, it can actually build a wall between the two. It could produce feelings of mistrust and perceived superiority. Anchoring is conditioning an individual for a certain response based on a sensory trigger like a handshake, an eyebrow movement, or the sound of a bell. It's well known as a conditioning experiment, but Pavlov and his dogs are a good example of anchoring. The bell is the anchor and sensory trigger used to make the dogs salivate. Imagine sitting down to your job interview with the boss for the first time. Initial impressions are everything. You want to make sure the interviewer knows you are great in a leadership position. You know, leadership is crucial to this role and the highest priority for the interviewer. Anchoring can work well for you here, discreetly and quickly. Pay attention to the interviewer's pace, tone, breathing, and body language as you listen. When the interviewer takes time to talk to you about the importance of leadership in this role and the qualities of a leader, listen. When these qualities are mentioned, raise your eyebrow in a subtle way that still makes sense in the conversation, but disruptive enough subconsciously to make a mark on the interviewer's internal map of reality. Each time these precious qualities are mentioned or described again, subtly and subconsciously anchor them to you with the movement of your eyebrows. A skilled persuader and reading body language may go the extra mile. Upon meeting the interviewer for the first time, the master would notice through body language that the interviewer is not comfortable making eye contact, in which case an eyebrow anchor would be lost. On the other hand, the skilled persuader can deduce that while the interviewer does not much care for eye contact, he or she is a very auditory person. The skilled persuader adapts at the last minute, substituting the eyebrow anchor for the clicking pen at the mention of these desired leadership qualities. Later, when the interviewer asks the skilled persuader to expand on leadership skills and experience, that visual or auditory trigger with the clicking pen can be used again to subconsciously link yourself to the desired traits in the mind of the interviewer. If you ever seen Tony Robbins giving a motivational presentation, you may notice one of the physical anchors he has given himself and continues to use. He bumps the palms of his hands to his chest in an enthusiastic and competitive expression. This, for Robbins, is a physical trigger attached to intense feelings and sensory memories of mastery, power, and ecstasy. Each time he does this to himself, it's like giving himself a boost of that all-powerful nothing can stop me now feeling. Another core technique is reframing. Similarly to the other techniques, this is extremely versatile and effective, and it's great both for programming oneself and in persuading those around you in a positive way. Reframing is another naturally occurring process in our interaction and socialization. Unfortunately, we usually use it to hurt ourselves instead of help. The idea of reframing is to take a situation that has been painted as negative by you or someone else and put a new spin on the situation that feels better and may have not been considered before. For example, let's say there's a job interview you go to. You really want this job. The benefits are fantastic and the salary is competitive and pays very well. After the job interview, you spend a great deal of time talking about that job opportunity and thinking about it. You start to plan out your budget based on this salary. About a week later, you find you didn't get the job and you're upset. You talk to your friend who knows you wanted that job badly. You tell your friend you were so sure the job was yours. You tell your friend someone there probably had it out for you and interfered. You blame other people, other circumstances, and you feel cheated. Your friend helps you by taking this negative downward spiral of thoughts and reframes the situation for you. Your friend agrees that it's too bad you didn't get the job, but suggests perhaps it's for the best. Your friend puts it in perspective and reminds you of the long hours, the commute, and the increased responsibility. Your friend suggests that even though you think you wanted that job, perhaps you didn't. It wasn't the right job for you. Your friend tells you the perfect job opportunity is still out there for you, but a step closer now. With this alternative view, you can put the situation into perspective, too. Things suddenly don't seem so final and negative. This friend has reframed the situation for you. Reframing is also a powerful way to regain feelings of control in a moment that feels frustrating and overwhelming. Of course, you should reframe a negative emotion with a neutral or happy one. The replacement should feel good, not worse. If you don't feel perfect about your first attempts to reframe, don't give up. It takes practice. Chapter 4. Influencing those around you. Never underestimate the influence you have on others. Laurie Buchanan, life coach, author. In addition to the tactful application of metaphors, modeling, anchoring, and reframing, there are a few more cardinal rules you should know about the art of influence and persuasion. 4 more acts of persuasion are yours to be learned, practiced, and mastered. You've seen briefly that there's influence to be had just by being a good listener. In this section, we'll take a closer look at the power of listening and smiling. Similarly, we'll examine the use of vulnerability, forgiveness, and empathy as a means of persuasion and manipulation. This will be another layer of technique to place upon the skills you've already learned. By doing this, you're refining and sharpening your skills of persuasion. The asset of listening. Listening can be perhaps the most important persuasive tactic you have in your toolkit. Listening to your prospect will give you most of the information you need for a successful persuasive conversation. By listening and paying careful attention to the words and body language your prospect is communicating, and by listening carefully for the words they don't say, you'll be able to discern most of what you need. There is still, however, information beyond that. By listening with deliberate intent, you make the prospect feel respected and understood. In some cases, this feeling is the most important part of the transaction. By listening actively, you'll be able to ask thoughtful and insightful questions. Asking better questions will give the impression that you're already invested in delivering quality. Not only will the impression you make be appropriate, but you will actually gather crucial information that could influence the success of your interaction. When listening is your primary technique, your prospects will notice this consciously or subconsciously, and they will want to listen to you and reciprocate that attention. Listening isn't just hearing words. It requires an overall comprehension of the story being told. In many cases, individuals are not as clear and concise at expressing themselves, like you've become. So listening to the conversation and finding the key components is up to you. Active listening also means paying attention to the sounds, tones, inflections, timbre, volume, and key used by the speaker. These details are also packed with information, revealing more insight about the speaker. By paying attention, you can determine someone's intentions, what they want you to think their intentions are, and what they expect of you. If you have the opportunity, ask questions about the pieces that grabbed your curiosity, or that you're not clear about. This isn't just another opportunity to prove that you're a good listener. It's a prime time to ask questions that will draw out more information that you're seeking. This might mean asking your prospect questions that will cause them to express themselves in a certain way. You might be able to derive more insights from additional body language and other communicative behaviors. When you listen, acknowledge what's important to your prospect. See if you can determine the main argument and emotions. The favor of a smile. Your ability to smile is one of the most powerful tools to influence. This is true of influencing yourself or others. We've learned over thousands of years that the smile is a sign of happiness and friendship, so the smile helps to lower our defenses. When an individual smiles, dozens of influential processes happen automatically. For yourself, when you smile, you're releasing neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin into your body, which benefits in a number of ways. The body relaxes automatically when you smile. This relaxation reduces heart rate, blood pressure, general pain, and general stress. A smile is so powerful that it can actually strengthen one's immune system and increase one's endurance as endorphins are released. For others, a smile from you to them communicates positivity and happiness. For them, this is a subconscious reminder of the happiness of other smiles they've experienced and releases good feelings, cultivating a generally happier mood and disposition. It doesn't take much. Even a smile that lasts but a millisecond packs enough power to affect those who see it. Recent studies suggest even exposure within a 1/16th of a millisecond is still powerful enough to have an influence on those who see it. The study exposed individuals to images of other people smiling, where exposure for 1/16th of a millisecond still influenced the group of individuals. Another set of individuals were exposed to images of people who were not smiling. At the end of the study, the participants were invited to all come out to a venue for a complimentary night of music and free drinks. Those exposed to images of smiling people had more interactions, smiled more themselves, had more fun, and imbibed more drinks than those exposed to images of non-smiling people. Remember that, while speaking in anger can be used to arouse feelings of aggression, this is not the influence you're looking for. A forced influence is a short-lived influence, the position of vulnerability. It used to be so, in business as well as other aspects of life, that showing any sign of vulnerability was not good. To show vulnerability was to show weakness, leaving yourself open to attack and exploitation. Today, that's not so much the case anymore. To display vulnerability to a client or anyone is the starting point for innovation and change. A bit of vulnerability, real or implied, makes the impression that you aren't afraid to face the music and you're accountable for what you say and do. One way to demonstrate personal vulnerability is to be yourself. Oftentimes, we hide a part of ourselves because we're worried about how it will be interpreted and what others will think. To be your true self puts you in a vulnerable spot. Others see this as bravery and they subconsciously want to follow your lead and be themselves, too. They may not actually do it, but they at least reminded that they want to live bravely and be their true self. The influence of empathy and forgiveness. The ability to understand and relate to another's feelings and experiences is yet another technique that can increase your powers of persuasion. If you want to use positive manipulation to drive an interaction, it helps to know who you're working with. We like people who are like us. So if a prospect is sharing information with you, be empathetic. Doing so generates a sense of inclusion for your prospect, and that feeling of understanding and acceptance is your ticket to influencing an interaction. Nod your head. Show concern. Show that you can relate to the stress or happiness of a situation in the same way the prospect has reacted. All of this helps you to be more relatable to the prospect, which builds excellent rapport. The empathetic person has a much better chance of influencing a person or situation if relatability is already built into the rapport. One of the key points to the empathetic approach is to capitalize on a perfect sense of timing. Sometimes a nod, a smile, an eyebrow raise, if done at the wrong time, can be distracting and off-putting for your prospect. Laughs, and smiles in particular, are important to get right. A misplaced laugh or smile amidst a devastating part of your prospect's story is not going to build an empathetic rapport. It will build skepticism and distrust. Practicing empathy means you'll have to put aside any feelings of superiority or pride. Where empathy puts you on the same playing field with your prospect, a sense of superiority will take you off again. You can't just try to cover up your sense of superiority. It's not about making sure the prospect doesn't see your attitude. If this is your frame of mind, you'll likely miss most of the details of communication. Forgiveness is just as important an ingredient, necessary for some kinds of conversation and communication. If a history of bad feelings have existed between two people or groups for a long time, forgiveness is sometimes the only act that can initiate a successful and beneficial breakdown of those old feelings. Forgiveness has roots in survival for our species. The act of forgiveness has, over thousands of years, helped to protect us. When we forgive someone, the benefit of that act is actually our own. It may feel nice to know for your subject that you forgive them and still accept them, but the relief you feel yourself when you forgive someone is tremendous. Letting go mentally and emotionally of the wrongs done to you is cleansing for you. Forgiveness has also helped us, through the ages, to solidify an effective and efficient social structure within communities and groups. When an individual does something to go against a society's fundamental mores and customs, that individual is often subject to some version of shaming within the community. But forgiving the individual and letting them back into the group once the lesson has been learned is actually a very common way to practice unconditional love for group members. This practice can also strengthen one's loyalty to a group, for having been brought back into the group even after breaking fundamental social codes. By practicing forgiveness, you build healthier relationships and improve your own mental health and state. Practicing forgiveness reduces the symptoms of depression and anxiety, and improves heart health in the form of lowered blood pressure and heart rate. Knowing that you're strong enough to forgive someone can also generate feelings of accomplishment, capability, confidence, and strength. Self-esteem improves. All of these changes to the mental and emotional state are evident in the interaction, making you a calm and collected individual with the confidence and power to forgive. Your demeanor will echo this. The strength of silence. In many interactions that will cross your path, the best response is no response. The simple practice of staying silent can offer huge influence over an interaction. It can be a tricky practice because we're naturally so uncomfortable with extended silence within an interaction. But what you'll find is that when strategically timed and placed, silence in an interaction can be a powerful leverage. The right silence can grab a listener's attention. The right silence can shake down your prospect and get them nervous about not taking your offer. The right silence can convey appreciation, anger, astonishment, confusion, or disapproval. Used at the right time and spot, the art of silence can convey many emotions and engage your prospect more, not less. It's been said of debate and negotiation that the individual to speak first is the one who loses, Holding your tongue in order to gather an ounce more information from your prospect gains you more leverage in the interaction. This is an early taught tactic passed down from salesmaster to protege. Business owners are privy to this tactic as well, as a defense against master sales vendors. If someone makes you an offer, you can refuse. In fact, if it's the first offer, you should refuse. The idea here is to communicate to your prospect that you don't need the deal as badly as they do, and that you're not afraid to walk away. You can test this silent manipulation in an innocuous and playful way with one of your friends to see if you can influence them. The next time a friend suggests you get together, try the following and see what they do next. Friend, let's meet up for a game this weekend. You, a game, huh? Silence. Let your silence linger a bit longer than you normally would. Chances are, your friend will be prompted to say something to justify the meetup. Friend, yes, we haven't gotten together in a while. Your silence will be a subconscious cue to your friend that you seem to be considering whether or not it's worth it to meet up. So the next thing they say will be something to support or justify the idea of coming together. Not only will your friend be subconsciously aware that you might not find value in getting together for coffee, but your friend will also get a cue that you might not find them as valuable a friend. This will increase their nervousness of being rejected, and they'll may be influenced by you to emphasize their worth. Obviously, this is an experiment you can test out, which is short-lived and not harmful. Don't continue to repeat this over and over, however, or you may just lose your friends. Similarly to silence, consider using the whisper technique. Place a whisper strategically into conversation in order to accentuate the call to action. By whispering to your audience or listener, you're creating a sense of secrecy and trust immediately. Not only is it an effective method for building rapport, but it sends a subliminal message about urgency and discretion. Chapter 5. Persuade, Seduce, and Sell. The next time you try to seduce anyone, don't do it with talk, with words. Women know more about words than men ever will, and they know how little they can ever possibly mean. William Faulkner, author. You've come quite far in your desire to learn how to lead a more influential and persuasive lifestyle. There are many methods you're now aware of for use in analyzing someone in just about any social interaction you can imagine. You've developed a solid foundation of practices you can start today to improve the level of confidence, authority, and calm coming from your body and your voice. You know how to spot subconscious information and how to deliver it. If you've been practicing these concepts and techniques in your daily life as you've been reading this book, then you've been developing and sharpening your own abilities as you've learned. There's a good chance that you're already an effective influence. Perhaps you've even begun to practice deliberate and discreet persuasion and manipulation to see if you can bring about a certain result. In this section, you'll learn how to apply a few more tools to maximize your results. It's a bit like you've evolved from a stock car to a slick race car and you're about to get some brand new racing tires. Persuasion through seduction and selling is very similar. In fact, the lines often blur between the two. There's no better place to look for a plethora of examples than inside the entertainment industry. By and large, the entertainment industry is seduction for sale. Not only is sex used widely in movies, music, vlogs, and in social media, but that's really only the tip of the sexy iceberg. The seduction used in media has such a broad and powerful reach that it ends up seducing us in other industries as well. Like fashion, for example. We generally all want to be seductive and attractive to others, or we want others to seduce us. Often both. The manipulative tentacles of the entertainment industry wrap around these desires and tell us how to have them. Use this makeup, wear these clothes, drive this car, change your shape, listen to this music. Our inherent drives take over because we want to seduce or be seduced. These industries surely how down the ways in which they can influence and manipulate the public. Ultimately, all marketing is about seduction, and that generally requires a strong understanding of human behavior, especially when it comes to communication and social situations. Whether you're marketing yourself for social networking, a business situation, or a romantic one, knowing how to read and apply information about human behavior is critical to your success. Seduction and selling. When you boil it down, there's not a lot of difference between seduction and selling. When we're talking about either, we're talking about the action of persuading someone to believe or want something. Whether we're selling or dating, we do this by tempting and attracting our prospects. In either case, we're enticing prospects to join us in something rather risky and exciting, even something thought to be foolish or dangerous. The obvious difference is determining the appropriateness of each situation. Though the two situations are nearly identical in many ways, there are some things you would do for a business situation that would not be appropriate romantically. Likewise, there are actions you might take in a romantic encounter that would certainly be inappropriate in a business situation. However, it's incredibly common for these to overlap as well. There are plenty of examples of sex used as part of a business seduction. Knowing where the line is drawn is up to you. Because the two are so similar, we'll look at them in the same way as we move through these examples. It will be necessary for you to shape and mold to a given situation as you go. Use what you already know about what drives human response to determine the appropriateness of the situation. With a bit of tailoring, you can use any of these practices in a romantic capacity or a business one. How do you tailor these tools for the situation? This is a combination of common sense and attention to reading your prospect. If you pay attention to your prospect, they will tell you with their body language and voice what it is you need to do to entice them. Pay attention to the formality of your language and presentation. It's comparable to whether you should wear casual clothes or formal ones. Also pay attention to the speed that your train is traveling. In both business and sex, moving too fast with someone will put them on their guard. Watch for how receptive your prospect is. The following set of skills and techniques can be used to gain new customers, close deals, or seduce romantic partners. The persuasion of breath. There's another secret for you to learn if you want to be a productive influencer. This one practice in particular ensures you're the person in the room with the most control and the most confidence. This number one practice is so obvious that it's also the most overlooked. Most of us don't even think about the impact of this one practice because it's an unconscious behavior. Breathe. It's not just a reminder to breathe. This is masterful advice to breathe strategically. Use a regulated breath. By taking deliberate control of your breath, especially in the tense moments, you can appear to be the cool and collected authority. To practice strategic breathing, take your thumb and put it to your chest, just below where an underwire of a bra would be. Press into your flesh gently with your thumb and take a slow, deep breath in. Notice whether you can feel your diaphragm pushing back on your thumb. Next, put your hands around your chest as if you were going to pick yourself up. You'll notice your diaphragm stretches all the way around your back. With your hands in place around your chest, take another deep and slow breath in and out again, and you'll be able to feel your diaphragm at work. Stage actors and speakers have to perform diaphragm exercises with their voice coaches for a very good reason. The diaphragm holds a tremendous amount of power for you because it can be used to regulate your breath. When your breath is slow and steady, you appear to be in more control than those with erratic breathing. You look as though you're the least disrupted or upset or worried. You appear to be the one who has it most together. This appearance, whether entirely true or not, is your key to being the most confident, the most calm and collected. Others will naturally look to you for guidance or help. As a final note on strategic breathing, when it comes to regulating yourself and your reactions to stimuli, know when to close your mouth. When we speak, we pass our thoughts on our breath. We don't speak as we inhale, we speak as we exhale. Train your body to close your mouth when you inhale, and open it to speak on the exhale. This is another sure sign of the well-regulated breath of a confident person. The persuasion of voice. For those who want to present themselves clearly and communicate persuasively, there's an important tactic that's almost as overlooked as deliberate breath. It's crucial to warm up your voice. Your voice is a primary instrument of persuasion. Musician would never step out on stage without having tuned and warmed up on their instruments. An athlete would never perform a feat without a proper stretch first. You will not be your most persuasive without warming up your voice first. Professional speakers, lawyers, politicians, and actors all use voice coaches to maximize the influence and persuasion they hold over their audience. It's not just a suggestion. It's a serious technique to maximize the results of an individual's output. Give yourself time to warm up your voice before you speak. There are many ways to do this, and there are several very popular practices for warming up. But one of the most popular is to sing. Sing to yourself in the shower in the morning, or in the car on the way to work. Talk to yourself in the mirror. Record yourself talking on your cell phone and listen back. If you speak often, or you're planning to, consider developing a warm-up routine that you can do in less than a minute to yourself before you begin speaking. Practice changing your pitch, tone, volume, speed, and silence. Experiment with your timbre and register, notes, prosody, and pacing. These can all be used to draw emphasis, create an emotion or response, and to bypass the critical mind for direct access to the impressionable subconscious mind. Use them all to paint your voice as an artist would use paints and brushes to design a masterpiece. The persuasion of words. There are an infinite number of phrases and combinations of words that can be extremely persuasive in the right scenarios, but there are 4 key phrases that can be utilized in most everyday interactions to influence those around you. These 4 phrases, or versions similar, are used by some of the world's most persuasive speakers and sales professionals. They're versatile, fast, and effective in most any situation. When you have the opportunity, try using one or more of these phrases to influence a conversation or decision. Imagine is a magic word that ignites the impressionable subconscious mind. Access to this part of the mind can obviously be used to generate influence and sway opinions. This word can be used in many situations to draw out the creative mind and get it to follow you to the outcome you desire. When using the word, it's often paired with the sensory perceptions that are important for the subconscious mind to become greatly enthralled with your story. This could be done by reminding your prospect of smells, prompting them to imagine a location or the sound of birds, or any kind of tactile experience such as warm towels right out of the dryer. The more sensory perception you refer to in the minds of your imagining audience, the stronger the story will be for their subconscious minds. When you're practicing persuasion on yourself or others, activate the subconscious with this word, and enhance it by utilizing metaphor and story with it. Attempt to persuade your audience by guiding them to imagine the benefits of a certain goal or outcome. 2 little letters can do so much. If is another powerful word that can be used similarly to the way you might use the word imagine. If asks your audience to break from critical logical thought, suspend their beliefs, and engage the imagination in another possibility, one where the desired outcome is achieved. By presenting to your audience an if-then scenario, the imagination is automatically engaged in order to fully understand the concept you're trying to communicate. They basically have to listen and conjure the scenario in the imagination to digest the information you're sharing. Asking for help can be an excellent persuasive tactic, even if you don't actually need help. When you ask someone for their help, it's an implication that you're confident they can help, but also that you can trust them. This is an ego boost, which can go a long way in an interaction. With a phrase like this, you can get someone to help you or execute a task for you. When you ask for help from others around you, it also puts those individuals into a social situation which requires them to make a decision about whether to help you or not. The decision is often needed on the spot and out loud. People don't want to create uncomfortable confrontation by saying they won't help, so they will usually comply. In some cases, individuals might be concerned that they will be seen as rude or uncaring if they do not comply with helping. Asking for help can also be used as a setup to a larger favor you intend to ask in the future. For example, you might ask your new acquaintance if you can borrow $1 for a snack. You eventually give the dollar back as you should, but it's really a setup scenario. You gave the dollar back to gain your acquaintance's trust and show yourself a trustworthy individual, because you intend to ask for a bigger favor in the future, such as a larger amount of money. In some interactions, passive-aggressive communication can be a huge influence. This is one of those communication methods. You propose to your audience, subtly and discreetly, that either they comply with the path that leads to the outcome you want, or they will be faced with the same problems they face today. Take, for example, a salesperson trying to close a deal on a home. The salesperson might implement a sentence like, "Either we do what we need to do to get you into this house by the end of the month, or you're going to keep on living in a neighborhood you don't like, with a school you don't like, in a home that's too small." How to spot and tell lies. Smiles can be very revealing, but not to expose a candidate for a great friend or trustworthy partner. Rather, to find out who is a liar. When a person exhibits a normal, healthy, happy smile, the eyes are involved in that expression. The individual's lips will smile, but the eyes will too. Smiling eyes have small crinkles at the outer corners of the eyes. Smiling eyes is a very difficult technique and muscle movement to fake deliberately. Attempt to fake them on your own face in a mirror. You'll be able to tell something looks off, wrong. This is what your audience sees when they receive a fake smile from you. They can tell something's off, at least on a subconscious level, and you'll start to generate feeling of skepticism and distrust among your audience. If there is one last fundamental technique a beginner of positive persuasion and manipulation should learn, it's how to be a good liar. Most likely you've told at least one lie in your lifetime. But are you good at lying, or does your lack of persuasive skills reveal you as a liar? Lying, while generally looked down upon, is actually another unavoidable mechanism for communication. Whether you've been the spider or the fly, in a big web or a modest one, you know that lying is a part of life. Sometimes a little white lie helps if you've missed an appointment, or if you're trying to hurry someone else along. Sometimes the most well-intentioned lies backfire. Save yours from backfiring by learning and practicing these skills for constructive lying. Try paltering first. This is referred to commonly, especially by politicians, as the ethical lie. The ethical lie is a practice in deception without technically lying. An example of this might be when a father asks his teenage daughter if she has been out with a boy all night. The daughter replies, "I went to Jane's house to do homework." This is technically not a lie. If the father calls Jane's house, Jane's mother will verify that his daughter was there with Jane doing homework. What the deception does not clearly explain is that after the homework at Jane's, the daughter did meet up with a boy to hang out for the rest of the night. Believe your own lies if possible. This will help you to enjoy the process of sharing them. Bad liars try to get the lie over with as quickly as they can, and this almost always leads to a messy lie that backfires. Base your lie in some truth so that it's easier for you to justify to yourself and believe. This can also help you to remember your lie. If you're lying to someone you know, like a boss, keeping your lie based in some truth that your boss is aware of. This way it will be more easily accepted. Keep your story simple. Sometimes people think that by including all kinds of extra details, the story is made more believable. This, however, tends to have an opposite effect. Typically, a truthful story does not include all the extra details. A truthful story generally only includes the details that are relevant and important to the audience. When you start to include random details, the audience becomes suspicious of it. When a child tells a lie, this is often a revealing mistake that catches them in a lie. As adults, we remember that and feel skeptical when it happens to us as the audience. Don't be overly dramatic. Subtlety is your friend. If your lie comes out with exaggerated gesticulation or drama, it doesn't sound like the truth. It sounds like you're working extra hard to cover up a lie. Imagine a colleague trying to get out of work early. When the manager walks through the office to see how the day is going, the colleague fakes a dramatic cough and wheeze and mumbles something about not feeling well. If your colleague isn't careful, this is going to be a sign of an obvious deception. Keep your lies in check. Knowing how to lie effectively doesn't mean you should tell lies without regard. Being a good liar means being a responsible liar. If you can tell the truth, you should. It's easier for you and it's easier for others to believe you when you do actually use a lie tactic. Liars are often caught because they tell so many lies to so many people that their stories are no longer consistent. Lying well should mean lying less for a well-practiced, persuasive communicator. Chapter 6. The Mindset and Philosophy. What we think determines what happens to us. So if we want to change our lives, we need to stretch our minds. Wayne Dyer, motivational speaker. One of the first steps in making a change to add more positive thinking to your routine is to recognize negative thinking when and where it happens. There are often times we can be harder on ourselves than others, and in some cases, this can be caused by purely physiological reasons and have little to do with our emotions. Recognize negative thinking. Consider times when you're exhausted from physical exertion, or a time when you're sick with a cold or flu or even allergies. The physical stress that the body experiences while it tries to repair itself can cause you to focus on the other topics in your periphery that echo those feelings of exhaustion or sickness. This focus on the negative begets more negative thoughts, and very often this can come in the form of self-criticism, especially if you're lying in bed, sick with nothing much to do but ruminate in your own head and stew in your own thoughts. Ask yourself, is the stew full of nutrients or toxins? The same can happen if you're experiencing trouble sleeping or if you haven't eaten well or at all. The phrase, hangry, a recent representation of this occurrence, made known by Snickers ads. Hangry, of course, is a combination word made from hungry and angry, and meaning that if one doesn't eat, he or she will become moody and angry with others until sustenance has been eaten. In the same way that being overtired or hungry can make you angry, it can also play a role in how much negative thought and behavior you resort to, out of habit and as a coping mechanism. Though some negative thinking comes as a result of physical sickness and exhaustion, much negative thinking is the result of mental and emotional stress of some kind. This stress could be expressed as any number of mental or emotional disorders such as PTSD or clinical depression. In some cases, there's actually a physiological response triggering in the individual that may put them into a period of deeper anxiety or depression, and for this reason, It could be said that is yet another physical cause of negative thinking, though the physical mechanism occurs in the nervous system. During these periods of time, an individual may practice heightened self-criticism and negative thought. Similar circumstances arise when an individual is put into a situation of high stress or pressure, or when there is a high level of obligation or expectation from the individual. These circumstances can easily trigger any individual to think and act in a more negative and self-critical way. The body and mind reacts this way out of habit to plan and protect the individual, but as we've seen, this negative behavior is mistaken for a healthy, beneficial process, simply because the mind thinks it helps to guard against impact from the world. Regardless of what triggers the individual for negative thinking, like attracts like, and soon the individual is drowning in only thoughts that represent negativity, doubt, and worry. It works very much like a train on the tracks. Let's say your train is pulling out of the station. It's heading in one direction and slowly picks up speed. It's slow at first and the wheels start pumping, but soon the train is headed in one direction with great momentum. Thinking gains momentum in the same way. When you start to build momentum in the direction of negative thoughts and ideas, the more you repeat and dwell in those negative ideas, the faster your momentum builds in that direction. But, good news, positive thinking can build the same powerful momentum. When the train is moving in one direction with great momentum, that's a bad time to step in front of it or pull the emergency brake. Braking fast and bringing the train to a full and sudden stop is going to be harsh on the train and its contents. It's going to send cargo flying and jostling about. Basically, it's ill-advised. So what do you do instead of stopping that negative train on a dime? Gently, slowly, ease up on the momentum. Bring the train to a slow roll. Eventually, to a gentle stop. When you're ready, you can let your train rest in neutral for as long as it feels good to be there. But finally, when it feels right, you can point the train in a new direction and slowly pull away, gaining steady momentum, naturally, safely, and comfortably. To accomplish this with the momentum of thought, you must first recognize the direction you're going, and do not chastise yourself for it. In fact, you should congratulate yourself for being brave enough to take an objective look at your own thought patterns. Once you recognize the train's headed in a direction that feels less than good and looks less than productive, you can practice thought exercises that will slow the momentum on the negative thoughts by getting general and going neutral. QK, changing the momentum, and direction of thought. Let's take a look at an example of how it's possible to slow down a thought train headed in the wrong direction with a strong momentum. This will give us a better overall understanding of how positive thinking works and how we can use it to benefit our own healthy development. We'll take the example of any average individual waiting for a job offer they've been hoping for. In a moment of doubt, the individual gives attention to the following idea: I won't get this job. The subconscious mind begins to imagine what that will be like. It spins a little tangent about the moment the individual finds out he or she didn't get the job, how much time and effort it will be to keep looking for another job, what it feels like to be defeated again. The train has left the station and it's heading in a negative direction. Soon, other thoughts join that first one. I won't get this job. Now my interview could have gone better. Other applicants are better than me. I never get the jobs I want. I should have tried harder. I should have dressed differently. I should have answered differently. I always sabotage myself in less than 60 seconds of thought. The momentum has built steadily in the negative direction. As these thoughts continue to gain momentum in the wrong direction, the subconscious mind is listening and believing the story it's being told. The subconscious mind believes the story so much that it starts to generate emotions based on that story. The individual begins to feel sad, cheated, doubtful, and used. Now that the subconscious mind believes the story, It shares this information with other parts of the mind that control what the body is physically feeling. As these negative ideas and stories are repeated to the subconscious mind, the body begins to act in accordance with these stories. 2. If the individual repeats thoughts and stories that reiterate feelings of exhaustion, anxiety, and fear, the body physiologically begins to experience these symptoms. The individual may begin to feel fatigue in the body. Muscles and joints may become stiff and sore or tight where stress is held in the body. Feelings of anxiety can cause the body to start feeling panicked, even leading to an actual panic attack just from thinking negative thoughts. With all this momentum behind the train, how is the individual supposed to stop it safely? The idea is to take the first offending statement and make it more neutral and less negative, but still something the individual actually believes. That is to say, it's rather impossible for the individual to lie to him or herself. The individual cannot just change the sentence from, "I won't get this job," to, "I know I've got the job." Chances are the individual will not readily believe they will have the job, so the positive phrase is only more of an antagonizer and sarcastic reminder of not getting the job. Instead of antagonizing oneself, the individual can practice a less specific, more neutral but still believable statement. The individual may change the thought, "I won't get this job," to the thought, "I don't know if I'm going to get this job already." There is less stress and pain in the statement. It's true, the individual doesn't yet know whether they were chosen for the job, so logically, the statement is sound. It's believable. It's also not as negative and hurtful. It's not so final. Now the individual may go forward from that statement and propose another general, neutral, better feeling idea, or the momentum of the negative train might be so strong that the individual is pulled back in that direction. That, too, is okay. When it happens, the individual can simply acknowledge it has happened and get general and neutral again. Let's see some more examples of how the individual can use this positive thinking tactic to slow down negative thoughts and bring the train into neutral. "I won't get this job. I don't know if I'm going to get this job. My interview could have gone better. Some parts of that interview went really well. Other applicants are better than me. I have the experience and desire for this job. I never get the jobs I want. I've really liked a couple of the jobs I've had. I should have tried harder. I did what I could do, and that's enough. I should have dressed differently. I dressed respectfully and professionally. I should have answered differently. That one answer I gave was a big hit. I always sabotage myself. If I get the job, good, and if not, good." The adjusted thoughts are still true for the individual, but they also feel better to think, and they don't give the negative thought train more power to sustain its momentum. When the individual replaces negative thoughts with those that feel less resistant, less stressful, less painful, the momentum of the negative train slows down. It's as if the individual stops shoveling coal into that train's fire. It's not given the fuel it needs to run, so the train begins to slow down. If you continue to practice positive and deliberate thinking, then the momentum of this negative thought train will eventually roll to a neutral. A thought train can be brought to a neutral place by practicing the shifting of ideas from non-serving to serving, from negative to neutral or positive. Watch our same trigger phrase move up the scale, from feeling bad to feeling good for the individual to think about and repeat. "I won't get this job. I never get the jobs I want. I don't know if I'll get this job. At least once or twice, I've landed the job I wanted. It's possible I could get this job. I wouldn't have made it to the interview round if I wasn't qualified. I'd be very good at this job. I can see myself at this job. I can see myself liking this job. I have a lot of ideas to bring to this job. I have the experience or the drive for this job. It's a good thing if I get this job. It's a good thing if I don't get this job because the perfect job is coming. Even if I don't get this job, I've already learned so much. The next time I interview, I'll be even better. I'd be happy with this job or not. I'm so proud of myself for applying to this job. I'm a perfect fit for this job. This job would fit really well with my other goals and cares. This job, or a job like it, is meant for me. I will get this job. With a short amount of words and time, the individual has softened him or herself on the subject of the job. No statement went harshly against the individual's core beliefs, and each neutralizing thought brings the individual's thought train to a slow. When you first begin to practice this technique of shifting ideas and internal stories in order to slow the train, it can feel a bit rusty. This may especially be the case if your wheels have been practicing turning one way for a long while. When you start to turn the wheels the other way, it's a mostly unused motion. It will take a few minutes to knock the dust off it and get it going. But if your mind is capable of sending ideas speeding down a track in one direction, it can do the same in another direction, a positive and deliberate direction. Be easy on yourself when practicing this, and remember there's no such truth as doing it wrong. If you find yourself back to the familiar or old negative thought patterns, it's okay. It's even natural for that to happen. Acknowledge it and put yourself facing the positive direction again and return to building that momentum. Eventually, the train which is given the most attention and energy is the train with the stronger momentum. There's a simple way to tell if a thought is serving you or tormenting you, how it feels. I hate everyone. It feels pretty bad. I love everyone. Feels untrue and mocking. So still feels bad. And there is one person I don't hate in the world. Less friction in that statement. And there may even be two people in the world I don't hate. Less friction in that statement. I don't hate everyone. Less friction in that statement. Some people are okay. Less friction in that statement. That one person that one time was good, feeling better. It's nice to know at least a couple of good people, feeling better. I have respect for this person. Feeling better and so on. You go. Fine. Tuning your thoughts deliberately. Thinking deliberately. To do something deliberately is to do it with intention. Deliberate thinking. Then it is quite simply the act of thinking thoughts with deliberate intent. Very often, individuals can feel as if they have no control over plaguing thoughts. It's as if these thoughts come into your line of focus and demand your time and energy like bullies or authorities that are out of one's power to control. This is not necessarily an exaggeration. If we don't practice keeping our thoughts in check, they will start to bully us, and it can feel futile to try and cast those thoughts aside. They are so loud and so aggressive that we feel it's necessary to focus on the thought now, and until it's resolved. In reality, this is a choice. The average individual is capable of navigating and managing thoughts of their own accord, but it's the lack of practice doing so that makes it feel useless. If you've never driven a car before, it doesn't mean you're incapable of driving. It means you have not been taught to drive. If your intention is to truly get a grip on overthinking, then you can do this with the practice of deliberate thinking. When you notice thoughts beginning to demand more of your time and attention than feels good to give it at the moment, that's the perfect time to practice deliberate thinking, rather than allowing your thoughts to run wild and unchecked. This is an opportunity to reclaim more power and influence over the outcomes and results you see in your daily life. When you practice deliberate thinking, it means taking responsibility for what happens in your life, for what will happen in your future. You cannot ask for your power back only to relinquish it when something undesirable happens to you. You cannot take responsibility for the goodness that's coming to you, and leave the responsibility of the discomfort. You are responsible for it all. or you are under the control of external elements of which you surely have no control. If you accept this responsibility, it means you no longer blame other people and other circumstances for your position. You have, in one way or another, brought the position to yourself. It may feel uncomfortable to accept that you're primarily the cause of your own discomfort, but if you're brave enough to accept this, it comes with an incomparable freedom. If you're responsible for all that has come, then you're responsible for all that will come. If you learn to effectively use tools like the power of positive thinking and the power of deliberate thinking, then you are free to sculpt whatever future you desire. Deliberate thinking, like positive thinking, is more about a change in attitude than anything else. It's about the deliberate intent to train yourself for better thinking and better feeling thoughts. When something happens that isn't in alignment with that goal, it's your job as the positive, deliberate thinker to change your perspective on the subject, or to acknowledge its presence and dismiss it from your attention promptly. This doesn't mean ignoring the issue altogether. It means dismissing it until it feels good to work with it, think about it, and figure it out. There may be a subject that feels big and scary and uncomfortable. It's been buzzing around you for a while now. It calls on your attention and demands your focus even when you don't intend to be thinking about it. The thought creeps in as you're working or as you're attempting to enjoy the company of a friend. It stomps and shouts at you and demands your attention, growing louder and more unruly by the minute. It's okay to dismiss that thought for now, even if the subject is something you certainly must confront. However, chances are you don't have to give your attention to it at this very moment. Practice dismissing those unruly thoughts and send them back to the waiting room. Eventually, you'll regain a reasonable degree of confidence and power over your habits of thought, and it will, at some point, actually feel good to deal with and resolve the tormenting issue. Rather than fight with oneself, the deliberate thinker practices control and dominance over thought, dismissing the situation from focus for the time being. In addition to an adjustment of attitude, deliberate thinking requires self-assessment and observation. In the same way, you must become more aware of when you're practicing negative thoughts. You must become more aware of when your thoughts are directionless and unintentional. Pay attention to when your thinking becomes chaotic and unintentional. Pay attention to how you're thinking. What thought patterns and behavioral patterns do you automatically resort to just because it's habit? If you've often played the part of a victim or a martyr, for example, do you automatically take up this role when a similar situation occurs, regardless of how you actually feel or what you could actually do? Don't punish yourself for an automatic behavior. Just recognize it and replace it. It once may have served you well to play the part of a victim or a martyr, but now it no longer serves as it used it, and in fact is a hindrance to your progress and evolution. By paying attention to the thought habits you've formed, you can more easily recognize when you're about to fall into a pattern of habit, as opposed to a pattern of new thinking and new behavior that will benefit you. With this recognition, you can more easily and more quickly practice taking control of your thoughts and reroute your train before it gains too much momentum in the wrong direction. Deliberate thinking requires that you assess when you think, how you think, and especially what you think, and then make deliberate improvements to those. What you think about most should be chosen deliberately by you, and it should be based primarily on how good it feels right now to focus on it. You practice these thoughts and actions deliberately because they're more satisfying for you and more beneficial to you. The combination of positive thinking and deliberate thinking is unbeatable, and this is a major factor for the insight and focus on this book. These are your two most powerful weapons, and there is nothing you cannot confront without them. These tools remind you that you have the power and you're in control. not necessarily control of all worldly circumstances, but rather how you react to them. If deliberate thinking is to think with intent, this could, in theory, mean the intention of dwelling in uncomfortable, bad feeling thoughts. Deliberate means intentional, not necessarily good. To practice intentionally, but without the benefit of positive thought, could land you in a similar or worse nightmare of overthinking. Positive thinking without deliberate thinking is a pattern with no goal or destination, no sense of accomplishment. It can be easy to float through the day enjoying every butterfly and rainbow, but without intention behind your patterns of thought and behavior, there is little to be gained. Overthinkers generally want to regain control over their thoughts in order to accomplish something, a series of things. Happy thoughts without direction may feel good, but your train will be headed to an unknown destination. If that is your intention, so be it. But many of us have other intentions in mind, and this will be most easily accomplished by a combination of deliberate and positive thinking. An example of using these tools in conjunction might be the coworker who just handed in a report that could make or break their promotion. The coworker is a deliberate thinker, so rather than fret and focus on all that could go wrong with the report, he or she deliberately chooses to look at the experience in a good light, regardless of the outcome, and chooses to stay focused on the topics that feel good. The coworker recognizes that by doing this, his or her additional work is of a higher quality, and he or she can contribute greater suggestions at subsequent meetings. If the coworker had not practiced deliberate thinking, the negative worries and anxieties of submitting the report would hassle him or her for at least the rest of the day. Focusing on other work would be difficult, and the coworker would have little to no value to add at meetings. Positive thinking is your train's fuel, and your intention is the track. With both, your train will quickly gain momentum in the direction you've chosen. With one, but not the other, your train will build momentum but be headed in an unknown direction, or it will be pointed in an intentional direction with no fuel to get it there. Stoicism and dialectical behavior therapy. Two more concepts to embrace in order to get yourself in the right mindset are Stoicism and dialectical behavioral therapy, or DEBT. Stoicism is much like the practice of Zen, with a few differences. Stoicism and Zen Buddhism are similar philosophies, but from different cultures. While Stoicism comes to us from Greece, around 300 BC, Zen Buddhism comes to us from what is now Nepal, around 500 BC. The major idea behind both is to find happiness in the moment, regardless of the conditions of your circumstance. Though Stoicism deals more or less with social behavior, and Buddhism deals more with the spiritual nature, both teach us to quiet internal thought and struggle and surrender to the moment for true happiness and a calmer life. Your attention should be focused on the present, and as we take a look at the practice of mindfulness in a moment, we will learn how to achieve that. Stoics, like Buddhists, seek to rid themselves of desire. In both practices, the goal is to let go of both pain and pleasure, good and bad, and to live objectively. Only when the objective perspective is achieved can one be freed from the bondage of desire. One of the major differences between Stoicism and Buddhism are the cultural values, though both work and neither is better than the other. Buddhists believe in karma, which is to say, you get what you give, and that which you do in this life will affect your next life. Stoics don't believe in multiple lives, but rather take the more scientific approach that death is a part of life, and we all meet our complete end in this life. Dialectical behavioral therapy is a part of the study and application of cognitive behavioral therapy, and like the Stoics, its principles lie on the side of logic and science rather than spiritualism. However, its main goal is still to teach individuals how to more effectively live in the moment. These techniques teach how to positively deal with stress and regulate emotions in order to live a fuller and more peaceful life with the world around you and those in it. Dialectical is a much newer practice, making its debut in the world of cognitive behavioral therapy in the 1980s. Dialectics, like Stoicism, is based on the idea that all things are interconnected and that there is no true good or bad, but rather only condition and the ways we respond to our conditions. Mindfulness is a general application of these beliefs, which we'll take a look at next. Mindfulness, like simple living, is a concept that goes very far back through history, but comes to the U.S. through relatively recently means. In the 1960s, the United States grew more familiar with Vietnamese Buddhist monk and activist Thich Nhat Hanh. Hanh studied, practiced, and taught mindfulness, and in fact taught at Princeton and Columbia University in the 60s. It is primarily through the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh that mindfulness has found its way into Western culture. Thich Nhat Hanh taught mindfulness to regularly take notice of where you are in your mental process. He also taught the importance of slowing down to live in the moment and practice the small daily pieces of life with extrasensory focus. The teachings of Hanh were recognized by American medical professor and society founder of the University of Massachusetts Medical School, Jon Kabat-Zinn. For a time, Kabat-Zinn was a student of Hanh's and eventually went on to develop the study of mindfulness as we know it today. Any of the techniques and practices used today in coaching and therapy, as well as personal practice, are rooted in the same two concepts. Bring yourself back. Refocus. Recollect your thinking. When your mind begins to wander from the one thing you're doing, gently bring it back. Savor the moment you're in right now. Rather than wanting to rush through one thing to get to another, appreciate the step you're at in this very moment. If you're washing the dishes, your mind should stay on the one dish you're washing. You pay extra close attention to the experience of washing this one particular plate in this one particular moment. If your mind starts to slip and think about the next plate you'll wash, you gently bring it back to the plate you're holding and focus on, quite literally, the task at hand. Practicing mindfulness is a wonderful complement to practicing minimalism. Both remind the individual that simple is better. If it feels too complicated, you can probably simplify it, whether it's a physical space or a mental attitude. Here are a few mindfulness techniques commonly used by practitioners and therapists, as well as self-practicing individuals. Keep in mind they're all to do with focus on the small and simple pieces of everyday life. They may seem mundane at first glance, but that's basically the point here. Something we might normally rush through is something we should fully observe and appreciate. That includes the moments that aren't so enjoyable. Find a chair and sit in it. Don't do anything else. Sit in the chair only. Sit in that chair for about 5 minutes, and when your mind starts to wander, bring it back to the observation of the chair. How does it feel? How does it smell? What does it feel like? Hard or soft? Silky or leathery? What does your skin feel like on the chair? What does it sound like when you move in the chair? And when your mind begins to wander, gently bring it back to focus on the experience of sitting in a chair, and nothing else. When you're eating, alone or in a group, at home or at the office, in any situation you find yourself eating, practice mindfulness. Move your utensils more slowly than you normally might. Take a bite on your fork or spoon that will easily fit into your mouth without struggle. Chew that piece of food more slowly than you normally might. Pay closer attention to the textures and flavors. Put your utensil down while you chew. Take a sip of water after swallowing your food. This can be something as simple as enjoying the smell of the soap or shampoo you use in the shower, or something as extreme as skydiving. There's a wide range of activities from one to the other, and you're sure to find comfort somewhere between them. Give your senses a new thrill. Visit a new city or town. Listen to new music. Rent a car just to switch it up. Try a food you've never had. Find ways of igniting the senses. When someone is talking, give your full attention to them. Be attentive to the language they use to express themselves. Pay attention to their body language and what they don't say. If you're on the phone with someone, sit down and talk to them as if they were in front of you. Avoid talking on the phone while you're doing 10 other things around your house. Do not multitask. Get it yet? It's about doing one thing, and one thing only, and dedicating your focus and attention to that one thing until it's complete. As often as you can, practice giving your full attention to one process at a time, and watch how much faster you excel at the activity. Learn from pain. It's part of life. There's bound to be some discomfort. If you want flowers, you've got to have showers. Mindfulness says to be patient and kind with yourself about that, too. In the moments of life that don't necessarily feel good subjectively, you can still experience calm and happiness in knowing that you will learn and grow from this painful experience. The primary benefit of practicing mindfulness is giving the analytical mind something to do and focus on. Observe the moment. Savor the moment. The busy analytical mind has an activity to engage in which keeps the mind from otherwise following the negative streams of thought to a sad conclusion. The secondary benefit of practicing mindfulness is the natural increase of positivity. By practicing mindfulness, individuals often gain satisfaction from the realization that they could enjoy doing things much more when the goal is simply to enjoy doing anything that comes to them. In addition to these rather abstract benefits, the practice of mindfulness can benefit in physical, measurable ways too. Mindfulness often helps to lower heart rate and blood pressure, increase circulation, release tense muscles and joints, and assists in helping sick individuals to recover faster. Remember these tips. Some exercises may sound too simple or silly for you, but you're encouraged to give each exercise and technique a chance. It's not unusual to find that the simplest concepts are actually the trickiest. The silliest seeming practices may be the most revealing. Some of these exercises will resonate with you more strongly than others. Stick to the ones you like and don't force yourself to engage in exercises that feel uncomfortable or stressed, as these may only increase feelings of self-doubt or wrong-doing. Humans are creatures of habit. Rather than try to break that, your aim is to use it. Set a time to meditate each day. Make it approximately the same time each day, too, so that body physiologically learns the new and healthy patterns you're implementing. Take time in the moment. Some of these exercises will require you to be in the midst of an unhealthy or negative idea forming before you can use the techniques. In addition to setting aside specific times to practice, include spontaneous practice. Use a few exercises or techniques that require no preparation, special location, or specific materials for your spontaneous practice. Be patient with yourself. You've been trained very well to overanalyze and self-criticize, so it will take a little practice before you start to dissolve those patterns and establish new ones. Being patient, gentle, and forgiving with yourself in this process will teach you to be the same way with yourself in future endeavors. Be patient with others. Others may not be as ready and as open as you to understanding this and making positive changes. That's okay. It's not your job to make them ready, and it's not your job to teach them. Your focus is on your behaviors and your practice and improvement of deliberate communication. If others are interested in the changes you're making, it may feel comfortable and nice to share this information with them and listen to the information they have about these ideas. When others aren't interested or are made uncomfortable, don't force it. Don't stop here. This is only the beginning. This information has primed you to go into the world and discover your positive and deliberate influence.